I was tossed into the river of the underworld right after I was born. Just when I was about to lose consciousness, not a single person came to rescue me. My father, he was still on the shore, howling like a madman. Turns out, this was all part of the Baskerville family's test. Every newborn must crawl through the Blade Graveyard, then undergo the baptism of the river of the underworld. In my past life, I was the strongest hound of the family. To gain my father's approval, I did all the dirty work, killing countless enemies, even earning battle glory during the demon invasion. But what was my reward? My father personally sent me to the guillotine because I became too strong, threatening his position and uncovering secrets I shouldn't know. Then, he framed me for conspiring with demons. If I had the chance to choose again, I'd personally destroy this rotten family. But fate gave me a second chance. It sent me back to when I was an infant. And I wasn't alone. There were many other babies like me. This so-called test was just a scheme to solidify the Baskerville family's power, picking babies from different families to undergo trials, and then raising them to become the family's killing hounds. In my past life, I was one of them. As both the family heir and a side branch bastard, my status was barely above that of a servant. No matter how hard I fought, I never earned any recognition. But now that I've been reborn, this time I'll make sure the entire Baskerville family crashes and burns. My performance this time caught the attention of the men, and they brought me to the testing grounds alone. To first trial, crawl through countless blade graves. For me, Reborn, it was a piece of cake. To second trial, the river of the underworld. The longer you stay submerged, the stronger the blessings you receive. So, I decided that this time, I would last longer and become even stronger than in my past life. Even when I was on the brink of losing consciousness, I refused to give up. Finally, the men pulled me out of the river. When they saw I had lasted a full 7 minutes in the river of the underworld, they couldn't help but burst into laughter. When I woke up, I found myself back in the dimly lit nursery. Now, I had a much better starting point than in my past life. This time, I swore to kill everyone who betrayed me. Just then, a maid placed a delicate box at my bedside. Hey, I never got gifts in my past life. Sure enough, when I opened it, two venomous snakes slowly crawled out. Clearly, someone in the family was jealous of my talent and had planned to use these snakes to eliminate me. But if I didn't act, these snakes would kill all the other babies. Without hesitation, I grabbed them and tore them into pieces, and so, my revenge began. Though I never uncovered the mastermind behind it all, the coldness in my heart only deepened. 8 years flew by in the blink of an eye. Along with all the other bows who passed the trials, I began my swordsmanship lessons. In this world, swordsmanship and magic go hand in hand, and strength is divided into 4 levels: Swordman, Swordmaster, Sword Saint, and Sword King. The strongest swordsman in the family is my father, Hugo. His swordsmanship has reached the peak. In my past life, because of my low status, I never received the family's swordsmanship training. No matter how hard I try, I was never a match for my father. Now, the 3 rookies around me are giving me some pretty nasty looks. Sure enough, after class, they cornered me in a small room. They were unimpressed by my performance in the river of the underworld and decided to test out the rumors for themselves. I remember these 3 rookies clearly. In my past life, they were part of the family's hunt for me. Since that's the case, I'll gladly play along with them. In the blink of an eye, I bit off the hand one of them had placed over my mouth. They froze, completely dumbfounded, watching their panic. I sneered, "Not bad, it tastes pretty good." To my surprise, one of the rookies actually started crying. But the other one, suddenly, pulled out a dagger and lunged at my stomach. However, I had already received the blessing of the river of the underworld, and after 8 years of training, ordinary blades couldn't hurt me. Before he could react, I grabbed his hand and grinned wickedly. "Have you figured out how you're going to die yet?" I tossed the dagger at their feet and said, "Only one of you will leave here alive. The rest, you decide. Triplets, huh? Let's see if your brotherly bond can surpass life and death." As I expected, the 3 rookies immediately turned on each other. They fought like wild animals. In the end, this little incident made its way to my father, Hugo. When he questioned me, I couldn't have cared less, because I felt I hadn't done anything wrong. But then, the butler spoke coldly. "Even though you hurt them, they still chose to forgive you." "Forgive?" I sneered. "That's the excuse of the weak." They can't even touch me. My voice rang out through the entire living room. Upon hearing this, Hugo suddenly burst out laughing, as if he was hearing the funniest thing in the world. In our family, where strength is everything, who would speak for the weak? Hugo even allowed me to take any food I wanted from the family's storage room, and wished me the best of luck in the survival exam 5 days from now. I thanked the family head and then went with the butler to the storage room. Surrounded by an array of food, I only picked blood beans. The butler stared, then pulled out a whole bag. The beans smelled rich, like coffee. With a slight bitterness, my heart skipped a beat as I realized this was crucial for the trial in 5 days. The survival exam was finally here. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, and it was also a crucial step in taking down the Baskerville family. The survival exam is the final test for selecting the family's hounds. Everyone in the Baskerville family has gone through hellish training since childhood. Sleeping with magical beasts, climbing cliffs, it's basically just another Tuesday. But this exam is more important. It will determine our hound rank. We'll be entering the Beast Mountain range to survive for a month. The grading is simple. Survive, and you pass, no injuries, that's a pass. Successfully kill a magical beast and survive, that's 70 points. Kill one alone without injuries, 90 points. There's no option for a perfect score, but if you collect medals from other participants, you can earn extra points. Maybe these extra points are the key to the perfect score. The examiner warns us that there are forbidden zones in the mountains areas where extremely powerful beasts dwell, and even they aren't confident they can make it out safely. But the forbidden zone is exactly where I intend to go. With the sound of a bell, the exam officially begins. In the next few days, everyone else is desperately trying to score points, but I'm having a pretty easy time. While they're battling monsters in the Beast Mountain range, I'm just chilling in a safe spot, roasting little fish. It's all part of my plan to mislead the ones watching us, making them think I'm not a threat and shifting their focus onto the others. As soon as I feel their gazes fade away, I let out a soft laugh and turn towards the forbidden zone. The real hunt is just beginning. As I step into the forbidden zone, the trees around me are scorched, my prey is close, and sure enough, not long after, I feel a hot, intense aura coming my way. Hellhound. Finally found you, you bastard. I stare at the hellhound in front of me, and the long-dormant battle instincts within me awaken in an instant. Let's go. Time to test my new strength. I've already studied the hellhound's data, so I know its weaknesses. This B-rank beast is no match for me, especially since I've set up a trap. First, hellhounds are afraid of water, even shallow puddles slow them down. Second, when they run, they open their mouths, and every canine beast has a fatal weakness. That weakness is the blood bean. For us, blood beans are a stimulant, but for them, it's deadly poison. I quickly shove a blood bean into the hellhound's mouth. It collapses in agony. Just like that, a B-rank beast is taken down so easily by me. The karmic energy flowing from it will boost my power. Looks like this trip to the forbidden zone is going to make me stronger and stronger. With its defeat, I'll be the top scorer in this survival exam, no doubt. I can't wait to see Hyogo's face when he sees that I, an 8-year-old kid, just killed a B-rank beast. Just as I was basking in my victory, a strange sound suddenly came from behind. No way, could there be more hellhounds? I still had so many blood beans left, I wouldn't mind another feast. But to my surprise, these hellhounds were running away in fear. How is that possible? As beasts from hell, why would they be scared of humans? Sure enough, the shocking truth was right behind me. An infernal Cerberus, an S-rank beast, was slowly emerging. Cold sweat instantly soaked my forehead. How could an S-rank beast appear here? It should be deep in the forbidden zone. But when I saw the injuries on its body, the realization hit me. It was fleeing from the barbarians. This infernal Cerberus was severely wounded. That meant I had a chance to kill it. For the past 8 years, I hadn't shown my true strength. But in reality, my swordsmanship had reached the peak of a swordmaster, far surpassing many of the adult hounds in my family. Facing an injured S-rank beast, I wasn't afraid. The battle with the infernal Cerberus began, and two powerful forces instantly exploded. However, its monstrous strength still shattered my sword and sent me flying. Thankfully, with the blessing of the river of the underworld, my body was extremely resilient, or that blow would have broken my bones and torn my muscles. I had been careless. Now I had to figure out how to lure it into the trap I had set. I started running like crazy, and the infernal Cerberus chased after me relentlessly. Just at the final moment, it finally fell into the trap I'd prepared. In the trap, I had already set up swords coated with bloodbean essence. It wouldn't be able to survive this. However, even after being hit with so much bloodbean essence, the infernal Cerberus didn't die immediately. It staggered toward me, still struggling, but I was ready. A wooden spear shot out, piercing toward it. Though it survived the blow, it was now staggering. I had coated the spear with the deadly crimson snake venom. The poison caused it to collapse after taking just 7 more steps, falling at my feet. Absorbing its karmic energy, I felt my strength surge, but the value of this S-rank beast was far more than just that. These beasts are usually guardians of some hidden place, and such places are often filled with treasures. Now that it was dead, I wouldn't let this opportunity slip by. To ensure my safety, I smeared its scent on myself. This way, I could avoid trouble with lower-level beasts. After some intense searching, I finally found a strange cave entrance from the aura it emitted. This must be the dungeon guarded by that beast. My heart raced as I approached the cave. What kind of treasure could be hidden inside? Walking through the pitch-black tunnel, I eventually spotted a glowing red portal. As I stepped inside, I was met with an eerie sight: a blood-red agate crystal standing tall in the center of the room. What caught my attention was the shattered skeleton in the corner. Could it be that someone had been here before? The bones showed clear signs of a bloody battle. I crouched down and picked up a torn piece of paper in front of the skeleton. The handwriting was familiar. It turned out that the owner of these bones was also a member of the Baskerville family. The note said that in order to unlock the treasure here, one had to solve a riddle. The riddle was, enter as 1. After entering it becomes 2. And when you leave, it is once again 1. This skeleton clearly died without solving the riddle. I discarded the paper and turned to focus on the blood-red agate, my mind racing for the solution. Just as I glanced down at the skeleton, the answer suddenly came to me. How unlucky he must have been, but as the protagonist, my luck was bound to be much better. Looking at the agate again, I finally figured it out. When I entered, it was dark, and I was alone, so it was 1. After stepping inside, the red light illuminated everything, and with my shadow, it became 2. So, when the light faded, I would be left with 1 again. The answer was my own shadow. I quickly crushed the blood-red agate. In the next moment, an intense wave of evil power exploded from the crystal. As the light returned, the agate transformed into a wicked magic sword. The inscription on the stone tablet also changed. This sword, it turned out, had been forged from the corpse of a demon lord, and only members of the Baskerville family could wield it. The legends were true. Ancient records spoke of how the 7 great demon lords once invaded this continent, only to be defeated by the leaders of the 7 great families. The head of the Baskerville family had slain the demon lord of gluttony, and to my shock, this demon's corpse had been turned into a magic sword. As soon as I grasped the magic sword, it seemed to sink into my arm, eventually forming into a sinister blade that grew from my right hand. This discovery thrilled me. With the magic sword of the demon lord of gluttony, combined with the skills and experience from my past life, I couldn't help but wonder just how powerful I would become this time. After obtaining the magic sword, I carefully scanned the cave to ensure I hadn't missed anything, then prepared to leave. But just then, an intense wave of hunger hit me, and I collapsed to the ground. It turned out that this magic sword was incredibly ravenous. It could directly affect my body, which was shocking. It seemed to have a will of its own. Then, the magic sword dragged me toward the hellhound I had just killed. After absorbing its essence, the sword gained its unique ability Bleed. This sword was a true predator. No wonder it was the legendary demon lord of gluttony. If I could also absorb the infernal Cerberus power, wouldn't I become even stronger? Sure enough, after absorbing the infernal Cerberus blood essence, I gained the top-tier skill Burn. But I couldn't let the sword keep draining blood like this. I still needed to collect the monster corpses to claim my reward from Hugo. However, I also realized that the magic sword had granted me a new skill: rapid regeneration. Looking at the rat under the infernal Cerberus body, I finally understood. The sword truly wasn't picky about its meals. Before I knew it, the January deadline had arrived. Everyone was bruised and battered, but they all got their scores and rewards. When I dragged the corpse of the infernal Cerberus into the room, the examiners were stunned. There was no doubt about it. I was the top scorer of this survival exam. Word of me hunting high-level magical beasts quickly reached Lord Hugo. He was so shocked that his jaw nearly hit the floor. Without wasting a moment, he had the butler summon me. When I met Hugo, I knew exactly what he was going to ask, so I immediately told him how I killed the infernal Cerberus. Hugo tried to test me, but I wasn't that naive kid anymore. I put on a performance. I'm the family's hunting dog. The family head is my master, and I will forever be loyal to the family. After hearing this, he seemed very pleased. As was customary, Hugo gave me the chance to make a wish. Without hesitation, I requested access to the Empire's vast library of books. It was a dream come true. The library was only open to the family head, the vice family head, and their direct descendants. In my past life, because I was a side branch illegitimate child and too strong for Hugo to control, he never allowed me in, and I never got the chance. To my surprise, this time, Hugo agreed. He even let me access the restricted areas of the library and recommended I go to the 6th restricted zone to study the 6th sword technique of the Baskerville family. I was stunned. Is this really the Hugo I know? However, I didn't dwell on it too much because my goal was much bigger than this. Hugo also wished me good fortune with my studies. If only he knew what I was planning to read. The swordsmanship manual left by the founding ancestor of the Baskerville family. I wonder if he'd change his mind then, but for now, no one knows the value of that book. This time, I will surpass you and become the strongest. Our game has just begun. Just a moment ago, Lord Hugo actually agreed to let me into the vast library of books. In my past life, I did all the dirty work for him, killing people at his command. Yet I was never allowed into the library. But now, just 8 years into this life, I've already achieved the dream I couldn't in my previous one. After receiving permission, I entered the library, and the first thing I did was head straight to the sword techniques Hugo had recommended. The book recorded the 6 main sword techniques of the family. To my surprise, as a side branch illegitimate child, I was allowed to see the 6th sword technique. Perhaps in Hugo's eyes, an 8-year-old child couldn't possibly remember all these sword techniques. If this were my past life, I probably would have fallen to my knees, overwhelmed with gratitude. But the truth is, in the Baskerville family, aside from the direct descendants, everyone else can only learn up to the first 4 sword techniques in their lifetime. No matter how talented they are, without the help of the original texts, they can never break through the 4th technique. I used to be the most talented in the family, but in the end, I could barely replicate the 5th sword technique. That was the reason I could never surpass Hugo in my past life. But this time, my goal isn't the 6th technique. What I really need is in the library's miscellaneous section. Finally, I found the swordsmanship textbook tucked away in a corner. The book contained some basic swordsmanship knowledge, but many pages were missing, and it had been discarded as junk. After filling in the missing pages, I discovered it actually recorded the legendary 10th sword technique. In my past life, Hugo, with my help, successfully collected 7 pages and eventually broke through to the 9th sword technique. At that point, he had surpassed everyone on the entire continent. But he never let me study anything above the 4th technique, and to keep his secrets safe, he even sent me to the guillotine. Fortunately, fate gave me another chance. This time, I won't let anyone in the family, other than me, know about the existence of the 10th sword technique. I combined the swordsmanship textbook with the missing pages had collected in my past life and spent the entire night studying. The guard knights must have gotten lazy because by the time I finished, I decided to start practicing the new technique I had learned. The next moment, I used my palm as a sword and easily executed the 4th sword technique. In my past life, I didn't reach this level until I was 30, but now, I've done it at the age of 8. My heart burned with anger, and as I continued to strike with my palm, I casually executed the 5th sword technique in the family. Reaching the 5th sword technique means entering the ranks of saint-level warriors. At that moment, I felt my magic power becoming pure. It turned out that after using this move, I broke through to the junior sword saint level, and my sword spirit power reached the liquid halo stage. This meant I had finally entered the true world of swords. Now, I had memorized the entire content of the book and decided to make it disappear from the world forever. Such junk would go unnoticed if burned. As for the 2 knights who abandoned their posts, they would keep everything. I did a secret. After completing my goal, I returned to the family to meet Hugo. I deliberately mentioned that my spiritual power had reached the liquid state, and both Hugo and the butler were stunned. An 8-year-old sword saint, Hugo was shocked, but he still asked me to demonstrate what I had learned from the 6th sword technique. He took me to the family's dueling arena. As everyone was surprised to be summoned, I was already calmly waiting for my opponent to appear. The next moment, the iron cage opened, and a sea-level orc stood in front of me. Clearly, Hugo had underestimated me. The chains on the orc were undone, and its vicious nature exploded as it charged at me, but before it could get close, I swung my sword and sliced off its arm. The orc's face twisted in confusion and fear. I knew why. The orc's rapid healing was useless under my sword because I had the B-level skill bleed. Low-tier beasts' abilities don't work against high-tier skills, and the result was a no-brainer. But that wasn't enough for Hugo. He clearly wanted to see my liquid spiritual power in action, so I decided to give it to him. With a swing of my sword, the orc was instantly shredded into pieces, scattering everywhere. But I wasn't satisfied. I turned to Hugo and asked, "Is there anything stronger? I want to fight 10 of them." Hugo saw how immersed I was in the fight and became excited himself. So, he brought in a mutated ogre as my next opponent. Faced with this massive creature, I paid a little more attention. Hugo had chosen a good opponent. The ogre was nearly at the 11th beast rank, which matched my current junior sword saint level. To defeat it, I would have to use sword techniques, but I couldn't use the 5th sword technique. Hugo might think I only broke through to the saint level by mastering high-tier beasts and the 6th sword technique. But the 5th sword technique required years of hard work and constant training, not something any genius could just pick up. Even Hugo only mastered the 7th sword technique by now. If he found out I already had the 5th sword technique at 8 years old, I'd probably become his guinea pig. So, I had to act as if I was struggling against the ogre. If I went all out, this ogre would be dead in seconds. I charged at the ogre with my sword. The ogre attacked wildly, and I narrowly avoided each blow. The family members watching thought I was trying to wear the ogre down, but they were stupid. The ogre's species already had incredible regenerative power, and this one was even a mutated version. There was no way to tire it out easily. Though I pretended to be struggling, my stamina was still being consumed. I had to break the ogre's attacks first and wait for the right moment. Finally, I sliced through its left arm, but a few seconds later, the wound healed completely. The crowd thought I was about to lose, and even Hugo seemed ready to tell me to stop, fearing the ogre's fury, but I calmly said, "Let me try one more blow. If it doesn't work, I'll give up." My 2nd sword technique didn't kill it, so I decided to use the 3rd one. All of this was just to make Hugo believe I was learning sword techniques in the heat of battle. "Thanks for playing with me this long. Now, let me take your head as a thank you gift." In the next moment, I swung my sword with full force. The blade sliced through the ogre's head like a shooting star. The terrifying sword energy instantly severed its head. In less than a minute, everyone was stunned. This 8-year-old child had just performed such a brutal, bloody kill, and even used the 3rd sword technique. Hugo, standing on the platform, was completely frozen, unable to say a word. After the incident, the young members of the family became even more distant from me, almost as if they feared me. Whenever they saw me, they would quickly change direction, as if they had encountered a beast. The only exceptions were the 3 arrogant newbies. After I taught them a lesson, they quickly recovered under the mage's treatment, and to my surprise, they became my little followers. Listening to their flattery, I was speechless, and a shiver ran down my spine. Luckily, the butler appeared just in time, or I might have given them another beating. The butler informed me that Hugo, the family head, needed to see me, so I hurried to the head's office. Under the flag of the Baskerville family, one of the 7 great families of the Empire, Mog family had sent a representative. If the Baskerville family is known for being the sword of slaughter, then the Mog family is synonymous with mages. In the family head's office, Hugo was facing a stern-looking man. He was Adolf Mog, the acting patriarch of the Mog family. They were discussing the upcoming joint training session. Despite their constant disputes over the ownership of the ruby mine, the Emperor had personally proposed this joint training. He believed that sword and magic were complementary forces, which led to the birth of Sword Chat. Unfortunately, most of the family members were still focused only on sword techniques. And the Mog family was no different. However, due to the Emperor's command, Despite their ongoing rivalry, the joint training continued. Hugo introduced the new genius of the Baskerville family to Adolf, who mentioned that Maud family also had a top-tier maid genius. At that moment, the door to the office suddenly opened, and a red-haired girl walked in. She immediately accused Hugo of stealing the ruby mine from the Maud family, calling him a thief and a bandit. Hugo remained indifferent, his eyes cold as always, but the girl didn't stop and kept provoking him. This time, Hugo was visibly irritated. After all, the Baskerville family would never tolerate such insults. But before Hugo could react, Adolf intervened, seemingly protective of his niece, not wanting her to be scolded. Just then, I arrived at the family head's office. Seeing the scene, I couldn't help but sneer. So this is how Maud family's children behave, so uncouth. As soon as I spoke, the girl, Camus, stood up in fury and confronted me. I stared at her for a moment, realizing she was Camus Maud, the only queen of the Maud family, the one who, in my previous life, slaughtered the entire barbarians by herself and even had the power to control the royal family. If Hugo, after mastering the ninth sword technique, still had someone to rival him, it was Camus. If history had played out as before, she might have ruled the entire continent, for while Hugo's age had caught up with him, Camus was still young. She was as beautiful as the rumors suggested, but that was a future far off. Right now, she was just a child. Seeing that I ignored her, Camus became even angrier and started arguing with me about the ownership of the ruby mine. She clearly misunderstood its importance. To the Maud family, the ruby mine was a vital magical resource, but to us, to Baskerville family, the land on which the mine sat was the true treasure. The Maud family, using their advantage at the border, had mined the ruby without permission, and as a family of warriors, how could we tolerate this? Camus pointed at me angrily. How can you steal from Maud family like this? That mine is clearly on our land. I glanced at her indifferently, grabbed her wrist, and locked eyes with her as I coldly said, "If that's the case, then you belong to me now." She froze, her face turning as red as a flame, and hurriedly retorted, "What are you talking about?" Seeing her panicked expression, I couldn't help but laugh. Then, I suddenly drew my dagger from my waist, staring at her without emotion as I said, "What I mean is, your arm is mine." As soon as I finished speaking, I raised the short blade, aiming for her arm, ready to slice it off. Just as I was about to strike, a cold aura emanated from behind me. I froze in place as I felt a terrifying pressure. Adolf Mach had appeared behind me, radiating an unbearable aura. Meanwhile, Camus seized the opportunity to break free from my grasp, running into Adolf's arms. Tears streaming down her face, seeing his niece being bullied, Adolf completely lost his temper. He glared at Hugo and shouted, "Is this how you treat your guests?" Hugo, realizing I had, indeed gone too far, opened his mouth to speak. Before he could say anything, I took the initiative to apologize to Camus and Adolf, pulling out the dagger and explaining, "Actually, this is just a toy knife." Seeing my actions, Hugo intervened just in time and stopped Adolf's wrath. After the farce, Hugo and Adolf continued their discussion about the ownership of the ruby mines, suggesting they would settle it after the joint training. At that moment, Camus turned away, eyes brimming with tears, and warned me to be careful. I simply gave a slight smile, signaling my apology. Soon, the day for the joint training arrived. The duel was made up of boys and girls aged 8 to 15, but the main event was undoubtedly the showdown between Camus and me. As the bell rang, our battle officially began. Camus truly was a magical prodigy. Though we were the same age, she could cast 4.5 saint-level forbidden spells at once. Among the younger generation of Baskerville family, only I had a chance of defeating her. Her magic was as fast as lightning, but I easily dodged, preparing to close the distance and fight her hand-to-hand. However, just then, a massive magical earth wall appeared in front of me. She started with 4 mid-level magic spells, casting low-tier magic in an instant. No chanting needed. Her talent was undeniable. But unfortunately, she faced the reincarnated me. My overwhelming power shattered the wall in an instant, and now that we were so close, she couldn't defend herself in time. Just as she braced for an impact, I simply flicked her on the forehead, sending her flying. This only made her more furious, and I only added fuel to the fire. Her rage boiled over, and she unleashed a fireball spell at me, but at that level, her magic was no threat. I had hoped that this would make her reconsider, but instead, it only angered her more. She began casting wildly, but I didn't want to hurt her for real. Caught in this dilemma, I suddenly saw something in the other duel happening behind me. An idea formed in my mind. As a mage from the Mog family launched a spell, I quickly leapt to the side, shoving aside one of the Baskerville kids, while warning Camus to prepare for defense. But the spell came too close, too quickly, and Camus could only watch as a fireball exploded in front of her. Adolf jumped to his feet, startled. The next moment, the explosion on the battle stage was deafening, a cloud of smoke engulfing the area, nearly covering the entire stage. Although Camus managed to block the fireball, her clothes were scorched. Once the smoke cleared, she became a laughingstock for both families. Seeing the tears in her eyes, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. After all, this mishap was my fault. Without hesitation, I quickly took off my jacket and draped it over her head, calmly saying, "Wear my jacket." Camus hesitated, embarrassed, clearly worried that I'd be left without clothes, but I didn't care in the least. As a warrior, why would I care about such things? After the explosion, I had already intervened to block the magic, and as a result, my hand was injured. To my surprise, even with the river of the underworld's blessing on my body, I couldn't completely resist the damage from the magic. As the smoke gradually cleared, I saw that Camus was unharmed, and Adolf sighed in relief. By this point, everyone's attention was fixed on my sturdy body, my perfect lines and resilient muscles. It is hard to believe that the one standing before them was only 8 years old. Adolf walked up to the stage and pulled Camus into his arms, his eyes filled with affection. Seeing her uncle's tender care, Camus might have finally found some comfort. After the training ended, Hugo asked what I had learned from my confrontation with Camus. I answered truthfully. Fighting a swordsman was completely different, but this time I had gained quite a lot. However, that injury was my biggest failure. Hugo fell silent for a moment before asking me what I thought about the ruby mine. I replied that we should just hand the mine over to the Mob family, for Baskerville family. The ruby itself was useless. Our family's goal was territorial expansion, and our greatest enemies were the monsters and the barbarians at the borders. If we gave the mine to the Mog family, they would certainly station more mages at the borders. All we had to do was push the monsters and barbarians back, and we could easily defeat them and take more land. Hugo nodded in agreement and said, "Now, it's up to the Mog family's stance." Sure enough, Adolf soon came to continue negotiations with Hugo about the ruby mine. This time, he proposed an alliance through marriage and paying rent, giving Mob family full control of the mine. To everyone's surprise, the marriage he proposed was between Camus and Hugo's eldest son. When Hugo heard this, he immediately thought it was ridiculous, as his eldest son was already 25, a full 17 years older than Camus. Camus, on the other hand, directly rejected the idea, saying that if she was to marry someone older than her, she'd first have to defeat her mother. Hearing this, Adolf quickly tried to comfort her. After all, Camus' parents were the continent's top-tier mages, and with those conditions, even Hugo might not be able to marry her. Then, Adolf said something unexpected. He told her that she would only marry the person she truly liked, and he cast a look at me. I was taken aback. Camus had an interest in me. Adolf grew anxious and whispered to Camus that I was just a side branch, a bastard of no importance. No matter how strong I was, I would always just be a speck of dust in the family. I couldn't help but scoff. The 7 great families were always like this. No matter how excellent I was, I'd never earn their true recognition. It was the same in both past and present. Hugo interrupted Adolf and emphasized that the will of the betrothed was the most important thing. He then turned to me and asked if I was willing to marry Camus. Under her hopeful gaze, I didn't hesitate for a second and answered, "I'm willing." How could I turn down a future queen of unparalleled beauty, especially, and she herself was willing to marry me? Even if I knew Mog family would never agree to this marriage, I still had to make my move. When Camus heard my response, a faint blush appeared on her delicate face. In contrast to her shyness, Adolf's face turned ashen. In his eyes, I, a mere illegitimate child, was unworthy of Mog family's precious jewel. Though Hugo claimed that only strength mattered in Baskerville family, I knew that was nothing more than a joke. In my past life, Even when I reached king level, the family still refused to give me higher sword techniques because they thought sign branch descendants could never be relied upon. Adolf clearly didn't think much of me. He even called my response irrational and said that he would never let Camus marry anyone so easily. His constant insults pushed me to the edge. Finally, Adolf suggested that he personally test my strength. After his repeated requests, Hugo reluctantly agreed. Hey, Adolf Mob, one of the most powerful mages in Mob family. Even in my past life, when I was at my strongest, I probably wouldn't have been able to defeat him in a direct fight. But since he insisted on a duel, I wasn't afraid. Battle commences. Once the battle started, I entered the arena with Adolf. He told me, calm and collected, that I shouldn't hold back, as he wanted to see why I was so confident in accepting his challenge. On the surface, I agreed, but inside I was thinking, if I actually go all out, would I end up scaring you to death? Adolf's magic swirled in his hands, and soon, 3 elements water, fire, and earth appeared before him. He could create objects out of thin air, and his power was so immense that it was hard to look at him directly. Camus, watching from the stands, was also taken aback. She rarely saw Adolf in action and was astonished to see him blend the 3 elements so easily. Next, Adolf pointed to a water jar he conjured above his head and said he would use it in our fight. He joked that if I made even a single drop of water fall from it, he would consider me the winner. His mockery got to me, and I couldn't hold back any longer. I immediately raised my sword and charged at him. However, Camus shouted at me to avoid charging directly at Adolf. At her words, I froze for a second. I'd never faced a magic user of Adolf's caliber head-on in my past life. But I stopped just in time. Seeing me pause, Adolf seemed a bit amused, but he didn't slow down. Suddenly, fiery cones of flame appeared around him, flying straight toward me. From the sidelines, Camus scolded Adolf for using such powerful magic. Adolf, however, retorted, asking her which side she was on. And Hugo, seeing that Adolf wasn't going all out, decided not to interfere. As the fire cones came at me, I barely dodged them, realizing that defeating Adolf in a direct clash was no longer an option, so I decided to use his assumption that I wouldn't dare make a direct attack to my advantage. I suddenly launched an unexpected assault, targeting the water jar. With a swift sword strike aimed at his magical defense shield, I repeatedly attacked the same spot. Adolf was clearly confused, as his shield was far sturdier than my sword. But after numerous hits, my blade was finally shattered. But by then, my goal was already achieved. The victory was mine. Camus, watching from the stands, was stunned, while Adolf continued to boast, calling my actions foolish. However, he failed to notice that the water jar above us had begun to leak. As the tip of my broken sword pierced the jar, I smirked and said, "Underestimate me, that's your biggest mistake." Seeing my flawless performance, Camus' heart raced. She probably thought I had just gotten lucky. But Hugo looked at me as if I had been nothing short of perfect. 7 years flew by in the blink of an eye. In the family's duel arena, the once young hounds have now grown into brave fan-blooded swordsmen. The 3 brothers with their golden hair have perfected their combined sword technique, reaching the pinnacle of their skill. Today marks the final training session for all of us. Afterward, we will be dispatched to various battlefields. At this moment, all eyes are on me. Everyone is curious, will I join the management like a direct descendant, or will I, like the collateral branches, serve as cannon fodder on the front lines? At this moment, the house steward's sudden appearance interrupted my thoughts. He said that Hugo had returned and wanted to see me. Entering the family master's chamber, I finally saw Hugo after so many years. Ever since handing over the ruby mine to the Mog family, the family has been focused on the war with the barbarians and monsters. 7 years have passed, and Hugo's appearance has grown more mature and worn. The scar on his cheek caught my attention. Hugo explained it was from a woman during a battle with the barbarians, but he had given her a similar scar in return. He called me here to ask which knight order I would join. In my past life, I had joined the Fighting Dogs Knights, moving between Red Mountain and Black Mountain, battling monsters and barbarians. This was the fate of most collateral descendants. Direct descendants, however, would join the elite management layer, receiving top-tier swordsmanship training, while also learning management and politics. The collateral branches could only serve as their guardians, or in other words, as their trained attack dogs. Would Hugo allow me to join the elite knights? I eagerly awaited his answer. To my surprise, Hugo recommended that I join the lower house for training. This is the family's most prestigious knight order, the true top-tier management, responsible for everything in the family and its diplomatic relations. Hugo himself comes from this order. This left me stunned. He would allow a bastard to join the elite class, let alone the lower house. Hugo's answer was simple. You are talented enough to surpass the elites of Baskerville family throughout the generations. He said this was why he treated me this way, and he even gave me the position of deputy lord of a city. But there was one more thing I needed his help with. I required a substantial amount of funds. I knew this was a bold request, but Hugo didn't hesitate to provide me with the money I needed. He trusted that his son wouldn't make foolish decisions. I thanked him gratefully, but I still couldn't get used to him calling me son, because in my previous life, I had never experienced this kind of fatherly love. The painful memories of that time, the moment when my neck was severed, are still fresh in my mind today. Hugo, I will never forget the pain you gave me. Just a moment ago, Hugo asked me to join the House of Commons, learn how to manage the family business, and become the vice lord of the family's territory. City of the week. I agreed to his proposal and set off for the family estate. A few days later, I finally arrived at what was called the most chaotic city in the family. The moment I stepped into the lord's mansion, a servant blocked my way. He clearly thought I was some kid brought in by one of the staff, but with a single fierce glare, I sent him stumbling back in terror. I then pulled out the family's official appointment letter and coldly said, "Get the food and wine ready. Tonight, we're throwing a grand party." The servants froze at my words, but they quickly followed my orders, preparing everything for the banquet and inviting wealthy merchants and nobles from all over the city. However, inside the lord's office, the secretary, Baskill, looked at the lavish party with growing concern for the city's future. After all, who would want a boss who starts drinking the moment they're appointed? He angrily thought to himself, why did the family send a little brat to manage the city? Just then, I appeared right behind him, coldly asking, "Are you the city's secretary?" He jumped, startled, but quickly introduced himself. I had already looked into him. He was a native of the City of the Week, promoted for his outstanding work by the family and given the surname Baskill. I knew his career hadn't been smooth. The previous lord was fired for corruption, and Baskill had been under a lot of pressure ever since. I told him I wouldn't interfere with their work and that I trusted he'd do well. Reluctantly, Baskill agreed, still unsure of what I was really up to, throwing a party, but not even attending. Instead, I was here, chatting with him, and reading a book. I closed the legal codex in my hands and told Baskill, the laws of City of the Week are full of holes. Countless underground organizations have completely overridden the city's laws, using illegal means to squeeze every last drop of blood from this city, making the people poorer by the day. And the inaction of past lords has caused everyone to lose trust in the family's management. I looked at him directly. So, first, we need to rebuild trust with the people, then we can wipe out these illegal forces. To do that, I need a legitimate reason to take down these dark powers. And as Vice Lord, issuing new decrees is my perfect opportunity. Before I knew it, the next day arrived. By then, Dotamiri Street was packed with people. Everyone came to watch me announce the new laws. That they were all full of doubt and disdain for a 15-year-old vice lord facing their challenge. I didn't say much. When the crowd had gathered, I raised a wooden stick and thrust it firmly into the ground. Then, coldly, I declared, "Today, I'll announce a special law. Whoever pulls this stick out of the ground will receive a reward of 100 million gold coins." The moment the words left my mouth, the crowd was stunned. Even Baskill behind me was shocked. Whispers spread through the street, but no one dared to approach. They even thought I might just kill anyone who tried to touch the stick. Seeing no one move, I raised the prize to 1 billion gold coins. Still, no one dared to try. Some people started muttering that I was just toying with them and wouldn't follow through. I simply sneered, then increased the reward to 10 billion gold coins. Now, the crowd hesitated, but still no one dared to try. Just when I thought no one would ever step up, a pair of tiny hands shot up. A little flower girl, of all people, decided to give it a try. The people around her warned her not to, thinking I'd kill her once she pulled the stick out. That the girl's mother was sick, and she needed money for her treatment. She didn't have time to worry about the consequences. The little girl walked up to me, and without a word, I pointed at the stick, signaling her to pull it out. She did so easily, and the entire crowd was left speechless. How could she do that so easily? The girl was scared now. Too, this was all too simple. Just as she thought I was going to draw my sword and kill her, I reached into my waist and pulled out a heavy bag of gold coins. Handing it to her, I turned to Basquiat and said, "Make sure to send the rest of the gold coins to her later." Then, I patted the little girl's head and turned to the crowd, saying, "As long as you follow my rules, everyone will get the reward they deserve. In the future, I will occasionally announce similar special laws for rewards." Soon, my image as someone generous and trustworthy spread throughout the city. After sending the gold coins, Basquiat and I returned to the Lord's mansion. This marked the beginning of my trust building with the people. The next step: clearing out the underground organizations lurking in the shadows. After all, with such massive losses, I needed to find a way to replenish resources. Thanks to my memories from my past life, I knew exactly where they were hiding. Just then, a messenger arrived with news. The city's autonomous association had requested a city council meeting. I couldn't help but smile. So, they've only just sobered up from the drinks at last night's banquet. Well, then, it's time to deal with them properly. But just then, the secretary informed me that the family wanted me to attend the meeting. Fine, I'd play along, but when I walked into the so-called meeting room, I was seething with anger. Instead of a formal meeting, I was greeted by a gathering of young heirs from local native families. This was the perfect chance to teach them a lesson. With that thought, I marched right in. At that moment, one of the waiters saw me swaggering in and actually had the nerve to grab my hair. Not many people would dare to do something so bold, but clearly, he was looking for trouble. In an instant, I grabbed his arm and twisted it, snapping it with a sickening crunch. The next second, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the hall. As I walked into the center, I coldly asked, "So, is this the garbage you sent to call me here?" They hadn't expected me to show up so quickly, and they scrambled to apologize. But it didn't take long before they started whispering, plotting their next move against me. However, I wasn't here to play games. Without hesitation, I unleashed my spiritual power, and in a split second, all the high wine glasses around us shattered into pieces. The rich playboys in front of me stood frozen, wide-eyed, finally realizing that I wasn't just some 15-year-old punk. I was a true sword saint-level powerhouse. Seeing my spiritual energy radiating around me, they began to panic. Some even started questioning, is he really just 15? At that moment, I picked out one of the young masters. Before I could even speak, he blurted out their entire plan. Hearing that, I gave him a cold look and slammed my fist into his stomach. I said coldly, "Only the master gets to test their dogs. If the dog starts misbehaving, the master punishes them personally." Then, I shoved the young master down and coldly asked, "Do you know why I'm treating him like this?" The fools actually responded nonchalantly, "Yes, he deserves to be punished for speaking out of turn." I smirked and continued, "Since you understand, you should also understand what's about to happen to him." Without another word, I crushed his skull under my boot. The playboys in front of me were terrified, but they still tried to threaten me, warning me of the consequences for crossing them. I was curious to see how they planned to deal with me. On Baskerville family territory, kidnapping, murder, slavery, and even threatening the family-appointed vice lord, these were all serious crimes. Death was the only sentence. With a wicked grin, I turned to the remaining ones and said, "Seems like there are still too many disobedient dogs in this city. Let me teach you all a lesson today." After dealing with them, I had Basquiat lock them up in the dungeons, even from within the cells. They continued to shout and threaten us. It was clear they had been living too comfortably for too long, and had forgotten who the real master of this land was. After entering the dungeon, Gil said to me, "After beating them like this, their families won't let it slide." I merely scoffed, unconcerned, and replied, "This is just the beginning of how I'll deal with them. I'm going to remind these families of the terror of the Iron Blood Sword clan. At the same time, I need their resources and wealth to strengthen my own power." I walked up to the blonde men and said, "For those who lack respect and commit crimes, I'll send them to hell to reflect on their deeds." Turning to Gil, I added, "After the sun sets, I'll execute them all." Upon hearing this, all the native second-generation heirs panicked, begging for mercy, even offering all their assets. Unfortunately, for those who colluded with underground organizations and sucked the life out of the family, I wouldn't give them any chance. Next, the world is about to undergo a great change. I'll be sent to the battlefield soon, so I need to wrap up things here quickly and gather enough resources to enhance my strength. After swiftly eliminating these pests, the situation in the city will gradually change, and only then can I leave in peace. But these people still held on to the hope that I couldn't prove their crimes. I scoffed, "Oh, I'd like to see you keep denying it." Just then, a bald man walked into the dungeon carrying a bag. Seeing him arrive so timely, I couldn't help but admire him. From now on, I hope these people could entertain me for a bit longer. Who was it that said I had no evidence? I'll be presenting the evidence very soon, however. I sincerely hope you continue to deny it. That would make me even happier. Remember, don't tell me anything. Under my intense interrogation, the native heirs confessed their crimes well before sunset. Despite this, after the sunset, I still ordered their heads to be severed, and both their confessions and severed heads were displayed on the busy street in the city, as a warning to those families who had once acted with impunity. Those who at once said I would let these heirs go were now stunned by my iron-fisted methods. They hadn't expected me to execute so many noble heirs all at once. This was also the first time in the city of the week that the native families had been held accountable by the law. From this moment on, the laws I decreed became ironclad in their eyes, and violators would undoubtedly be punished. But for me, this was far from enough. I didn't just want these families to suffer, I wanted to destroy them. Gil, I'll need your assistance next. A few days later, on the outskirts of the city, Gil was dressed in a suit, his face hidden behind a mask, walking slowly ahead. Behind him, a large iron cage trailed along, and I, disguised as a handsome young male slave, was locked inside. We were heading to a circus outside the city, where a slave auction was about to take place. As the event began, nobles and merchants escorted slaves and goods into the auction house, and of course, I was one of them. Once inside, a man wearing a clown mask began assessing the items for auction. After some inspection, I was selected to be the main attraction. As night fell, the auction started, and the atmosphere was filthy and chaotic. There were all sorts of goods up for sale, including in a class hellish wild bull. The bidders weren't ordinary folk, they were either from native families or members of underground organizations. Then, the next item was brought up, the young girl from the Red Mountain barbarian tribe. Despite the brutal torture she'd endured, and her status as a slave, there was an undeniable toughness in her eyes that sent chills down everyone's spine. Everyone knew that barbarian slaves could never be tamed. One day, they'd tear their masters apart. Despite the clown boasting about her qualities and slashing her price, no one placed a bid. The clown was furious, signaling for his men to deal with her, then preparing to unveil the next item. That's when they brought me up, with my black hair, fiery red eyes, and handsome features plus a body sculpted like a god. I immediately caught the attention of every wealthy woman in the room. The clown began his introduction, claiming I was a rare breed with black hair and red eyes, and that I was an untouched, pure male virgin. Before the opening bid was even announced, the wealthy women couldn't hold themselves back and immediately raised their paddles. 6 billion gold coins. It didn't take long for others to follow suit, until a man with a number 99 paddle bid 60 billion gold coins, and the room fell silent. This man was none other than Baron Gambino, from a powerful native family. Over the years, he had made a fortune through shady deals with underground groups. Now, his eyes were fixed greedily on me. A female guard beside him warned him that his bid was too high, but he scolded her and told her to stay quiet. At 60 billion, no one dared to bid any higher, and I was sold to him for an astronomical price. When I was brought before him, Baron Gambino grinned lecherously. His disgusting face was the last straw for me. Then, I raised the chains that bound my hands, and he thought I wanted him to unlock them for me. But in the next instant, I snapped the chains apart with ease. A powerful aura exploded from me, sending Baron Gambino flying across the room. Watching him crash to the ground, I walked up to him and asked, "Wanna play a game?" The theme was top and bottom, but I'd be rough, and he'd have to endure. His screams echoed through the circus, but before he could even call for help, I tore him apart on the spot. Blood sprayed through the air, splattering across the face of the female guard, who was frozen in shock. The entire room was stunned. I slowly removed my wig and revealed my true identity: Bask Vicky of the Baskerville family, vice leader of the City of the Week. My voice, dark and devilish, boomed, "Poor little Baron, you're so fragile, one little tear, and you're dead." That was no fun at all. Everyone stood frozen in terror, including Gil, my secretary, who never expected things would escalate this much. I flashed a wicked grin. "This circus suits you all. Don't worry, tonight's game won't be boring. And remember, don't even think about running before I'm done playing." Continuing on, I turned and provocatively challenged everyone in the auction house. The clown host froze for a moment, realizing I wasn't carrying a sword. Immediately, he signaled his men to attack, but just as they rushed towards me, my right hand revealed the gluttony demon sword, its blood-red glow flashing as the blade sliced through the air, cutting the attackers in half before they even reached me. The clown finally understood he had messed with a bloodthirsty demon lore. However, the masked giant who had dealt with the barbarian girl earlier seemed to be itching for a fight. I wasn't one to back down, so I welcomed him without hesitation. In an instant, after a single exchange of blows, I could see the terror in his eyes. I swung my sword, and with one clean cut, I split him and his warhammer in two. As I stood there, a bloodthirsty god of death, the others finally realized they were no match for me. But just as I thought it was over, Gil, who had been worried about my safety, jumped onto the stage to protect me. The clown saw this as opportunity and immediately grabbed Gil, threatening me to surrender. I glared coldly at the clown, though I sheathed my sword. The blood-soaked ore I had unleashed earlier had left the others too terrified to move. But what happened next completely shocked me. Gil, without a second thought, moved closer to the clown's short blade. Ready to sacrifice himself to protect me, he was willing to die rather than let me get hurt. The clown was taken aback. He hadn't expected such loyalty from Gil. I let out a laugh and openly praised his loyalty, telling him, "Don't worry, since I joined the Elite Knights House of Commons, do you think I came unprepared? Here's the backstory. After we dealt with those spoiled brats from the native families, I had told Gil that the only way to collect real evidence against these nobles was to personally get involved in their illegal activities. So, I had my family's Hound secretly investigate the underground movements. After gathering intel, I had Gil bring me here, disguised as a slave. I originally thought this mission would be a breeze without using my family's influence, but saving someone this loyal, that was worth it." I pulled out a whistle from my leg strap, took a deep breath, and blew it with all my might. The sound was deafening, echoing throughout the entire arena. The crowd staggered, their ears ringing. As the sound gradually faded, they slowly regained their senses. The clown, relieved, thought I had just tried to scare him, but just as he was about to threaten me again, a sword pierced his throat. He stood frozen, unable to react, before the Hound from my family, lurking behind him, decapitated him on the spot. Seeing the clown's lifeless body hit the floor, Gil stood frozen, speechless. When the other enemies saw this, they immediately rushed to attack the Hound Knights. But in a flash, the Hound Knights' swords gleamed, and those attackers were shredded into pieces, their blood and guts splattering onto the remaining enemies, sending them into a panic. "Stupid chose," I sneered. "You dare draw your sword in front of the Iron Blood Sword clan." Just then, the sounds of marching boots echoed from outside the circus. The Hound Knight Order, one of the 8 elite knight orders of the Baskerville family, arrived. Every knight had passed the family's brutal killing test, making them the sharpest weapons in the underground. The female guard's eyes widened in terror as she recognized them, the exterminators, the most ruthless knights of the empire, belonging to my Baskerville family's Hound Knight Order. Their arrival meant one thing: tonight, there would be rivers of blood. One of the Hound Knights stepped up behind the female guard, ready to decapitate her, but I intervened. Stopping the knight, she was useful to me, she couldn't die. After receiving my order, the knight spared her. I then turned to the Hound Knights and commanded, "Anyone who stays in place is to be spared. If you move, kill them all." The hounds sprang into action, mercilessly slaughtering anyone who tried to flee. A noble, kneeling on the ground, begged the hounds for handcuffs, but the Hound Knight Order wasn't in the business of providing that. His only option was for his legs to be severed. Just then, a towering man approached from behind. It was Baskerville Boston, my uncle and the commander of the Hound Knight Order. He had come to observe me, wanting to know what made the family's top talent so extraordinary, especially since even his proud older brother, Hugo, was so invested in me. Boston looked at me and said, "Join the Hound Knight Order. I'll make sure you're well used." I responded coolly, saying I had more important things to do. After exchanging a few words, I prepared to leave. Though my indifference seemed to disappoint him, it only made him more eager for me to join the Hound Night Order. After the Hound secured control of the circus, I made my way to the storage room at the back. It was time to collect my spoils. There were some things here that I needed. As soon as I entered, I spotted a safe filled with money, just enough to make up for the expenses I'd incurred. However, that wasn't the main reason I was here. I pulled aside the tattered cloth covering a cage, and what I saw surprised me. Inside lay the barbarian girl from earlier. She wasn't dead. Looks like today's going to bring me an unexpected gain. I had originally planned to try to tame her, but given that my magic sword abilities I'd be exposed during my next move, taking along an untamable barbarian wasn't ideal. But seeing her condition, with just a thread of life left, I decided to be a good Samaritan. Her physical condition was terrible. She should have been dead by now. Luckily, I had some life essence from my uncle, Boston. I poured it into her mouth, and after a moment, her body began to glow with a red light. Then, she suddenly opened her eyes. The barbarian girl woke up, terror evident on her face as she looked at me. She was shocked that I had unlocked the iron cage. Fortunately, after having battled barbarians countless times, I was able to speak their basic language. Using broken barbarian, I told her to leave quickly. She hesitated, unsure whether I was deceiving her. With time running short, I urged her again to leave without delay. Just as she was about to exit, she suddenly spoke something in an unintelligible barbarian dialect. Although I understood a bit, I couldn't fully make sense of it this quickly. Thankfully, once she saw I meant no harm, she got up to leave. Before she went, she said something that I understood. She seemed to be thanking me and Mensch, and that we would meet again. As I watched her leave, I began my treasure hunt. Eventually, I found what I had truly come for: the Hell Bison, the grade magical beast that had appeared at the auction. Since the events of 8 years ago, my magic sword again, I hadn't had the chance to taste such a pure-blooded, top-tier magical beast. At that moment, the sword seemed to stir, hungry for the blood of such a creature. Soon after, I successfully acquired the Hell Bison's special skill. A few days later, Gil was happily making me coffee, but I handed him a new set of development plans, expecting him to take care of them personally. Finally, after dealing with the day's affairs, I made my way to the dungeon of the Lord's Manor. I had been so busy lately that I'd completely forgotten about the female Gar I had left here. After investigating both her and the Baron, I found out her name was Cindy Rhodes, and that the Baron's rise to power was almost entirely thanks to her. She had always wondered why I didn't kill her, but the reason I kept her alive was because there were things I needed to figure out. The biggest mystery was how she helped the Baron accumulate his vast wealth. Because, frankly, I couldn't see how that bumbling fool could have pulled it off. I promised her that if she answered all my questions honestly, I would let her go. She answered simply, "I handled all the Baron's wealth." Then, she went silent. I stood up coldly, speaking directly. "What I want is the full process and methods. And you better appreciate this chance to stay alive." She understood the stakes, so I released my grip on her chin. Now, it was up to her to convince me. After a moment of thought, Cindy finally shared how she helped the Baron rise to power. To my surprise, she even offered some suggestions for managing the city. She believed that if I kept going down the path I was on, the city would eventually descend into disaster. Under my laws, many of the families would start to rebel, and the common people's loyalty would eventually surpass their loyalty to their families. At that point, both I and the City of the Weak would become very dangerous. I couldn't help but be curious, so I asked her what she thought I should do. Her suggestion was to first get the city under control, then return power to the family elders. She believed that, for me right now, resources were the most important thing. She also recommended that I go to Black Mountain or the Empire's Crossio Academy to hone my skills. If conflicts arose in the future, the family would take responsibility for the consequences. I had to admit, the woman was sharp. Her suggestions were almost exactly what I'd been thinking. But then again, I was nothing more than a hunting dog raised by the family. How was this any different from betraying my own master? Hugo wasn't a fool. When the time came, how could he let me go? I didn't let my thoughts show, just gave a casual smile, grabbed the key, and prepared to unlock her shackles. I complimented her on her insightful suggestions. True to my word, I released her, Although she still had doubts about whether I'd really let her go, everyone in the city knew I kept my promises. She stood up, ready to leave. At that moment, I suddenly asked her, "Have you ever heard of the Dunaro family?" The Dunaro family was a merchant family, one of the original native families of the City of the Weak. Unfortunately, the family was ultimately destroyed by the Baskerville family's blood sword. Upon hearing my words, Cindy clenched her fists tightly. It turns out that at a banquet, a child from the Dunaro family had demonstrated swordsmanship in front of the nobles, scaring them all out of their wits. That sword technique was actually a secret of the Baskerville family. When they got wind of it, they swiftly used the excuse of stealing the sword technique to utterly destroy the Dunaro family overnight. But the truth was, that sword technique had been secretly passed on to them by a few young men. Fortunately, there were survivors from the Dunaro family. The young men had managed to rescue a beautiful girl, but she was later subjected to inhuman torture. At this point, Cindy suddenly interrupted me, furiously preparing to leave the dungeon. I told her, the story is far from over. Later, a demon-like deputy lord arrived in the city. He used brutal methods to extract a massive amount of incriminating evidence from those young men, including proof of the Baskerville family's role in framing the Dunaro family. Cindy stopped in her tracks, her eyes already filled with tears. I continued, "That girl was you, under the name Cindy." She yelled, "This is just your side of the story. How can you be sure those people were truly punished?" I simply lit the torch in my hand and gestured for her to turn and look at the cell beside us. She turned around, and the sight before her shocked her to the core. Those young men who had once enslaved her were now headless corpses, their bodies covered in horrific signs of torture. At that moment, Cindy could no longer control herself. She collapsed to the ground, crying uncontrollably. Looking at her, I couldn't help but feel a bit of pity, but I told her, "I've avenged you against those families, but the vengeance for Dunaro is not yet over." I looked at her and continued, "The enemy you should hate the most is the Baskerville family." She wiped her tears away, her eyes burning with hatred as she asked, "Why would you help me when I'm a member of the Baskerville family?" My gaze told her everything. Some things, it's better not to know too much. Cindy stood up, determination in her eyes, and told me she would repay my kindness. She promised that I would no longer need to worry about money because she would provide me with all the resources I needed. That was exactly what I wanted, a smart business genius. More importantly, she hated the Baskerville family with all her heart. 3 days later, after wrapping up things with Cindy, Gil pushed open my door and was immediately met with a bloody scene. I woke up when I heard the sound, and found myself covered in blood. Gil, shocked, immediately asked what happened to all the bodies. I reply, "Some fearless pests paid me a visit last night, and I dealt with them quickly." After cleaning up, Gil and I got ready to handle some business. My mind was still busy processing some strange things that had been happening recently. For example, I got shot by an arrow the moment I stepped outside. I found poison in my water from a maid, and even on the street, a carriage tried to run me down. None of these things were life-threatening, but it was clear someone was intentionally causing trouble behind the scenes. I decided that once I was done with my current tasks, I'd start investigating these odd events. Just as Gil and I were discussing this, a finely decorated carriage pulled up outside, its flag proudly displaying the Baskerville family crest. When the person inside stepped out, Gil broke into a cold sweat. It was Bailey Moore, Hugo's butler. I knew right away why he was here. Looks like Hugo had heard about my performance in the City of the Weak, and from the looks of it, he was probably going to reward me for it. I hoped my actions had been impressive enough to help me get into the Empire's most prestigious academy, Crossio Academy, but honestly, right now, what I was really looking forward to was meeting Hugo again. Just as Gil and I had been discussing the recent strange events, this finely crafted carriage arrived outside, and stepping out of it, none other than the long-absent head butler, Bailey Moore. When I saw him, I greeted him, while Gil practically worshipped him. It wasn't every day that someone of Bailey Moore's stature would personally make a trip to such a remote place. Only Hugo could pull that off. Sure enough, Bailey Moore spoke. "Hugo is extremely pleased with your performance. He has sent me to bring you back to the family headquarters for your reward." A few days later, I returned to the family with the butler. When Hugo saw me, he immediately began praising my performance in the City of the Weak. He said I'd made it clear to everyone in the Empire that the Iron Blood Sword clan wasn't just a bunch of idiots swinging swords. I didn't let it get to my head. I simply responded, "It's what I was supposed to do." After his praise, Hugo gave me a reward that both surprised and excited me. He decided to let me enter the Empire's Crossio Academy early. This academy gathered the best and brightest of the Empire, and gaining entrance would allow me to quietly improve my strength without drawing Hugo's attention. Then Hugo told me he was planning to select a few people to accompany me, and that I could pick who I wanted. After some thought, I decided to bring the 3 blonde brothers along with me. Hugo agreed to my choice but suddenly asked if I remembered the plan for the ruby mines from when I was 8. Of course. I remembered. Hugo told me the plan could now be fully set into motion because the Mog family had agreed to join forces with the Baskerville family to deal with the barbarians. Ever since the Mog family took control of the ruby mines, they had been constantly harassed by the barbarians in the Red Mountains, but thanks to the pressure from the family, the barbarians had been pushed back to the borders. Hugo asked me to check on the border situation before I left, to help strengthen the friendship between the 2 families, and to see whether the laws I had enacted were being enforced. After all, the city of the week was right on the border, and several cities occupied by the Mog family were under my jurisdiction. I agreed to Hugo's request, partly because I might get the chance to meet Camus Mog again. Once everything was packed, I returned to the city of the week. Gil reluctantly saw me off and promised to take care of everything in the city. As I looked at Gil, about to say goodbye, I couldn't help but feel a little sad too. But this reward from Hugo had allowed me to reach my goal ahead of schedule. This was a rare opportunity, and I had to make the most of it. After leaving the city, I had all the hidden Hound Knights reveal themselves. There was no need for secrecy anymore. The man in front of me was Stafford, the Hound Knight instructor, and he would be in charge of ensuring my safe arrival at the Imperial Academy. I asked him about my uncle, Baskerville Boston, and his recent situation. Stafford told me that ever since the incident at the slave auction, my uncle had been eager for me to join his Hound Knight order, but I had yet to agree. The reason was simple: I had more important things to do. After meeting up with the knights, we set off on our inspection journey. Strangely, no one had broken the law along the way. Soon, we arrived at the city leased to the Mog family. According to intelligence from the Hound Knight Order, the Mog family had sent several important figures, and their interest in the ruby mines was far beyond what we had anticipated. As for our inspection team, it was really just me and a few dozen Hound Knights. It's worth mentioning that the true elite of the family were stationed at the other end of the mines, but they had nothing to do with this joint agreement. As we pressed deeper into the border, a desolate city appeared before us. The thorn trees outside the city were covered in white bones, clearly indicating that the Mog family hadn't been idle in recent years. These skulls were probably a warning to the barbarians. Seeing this, I couldn't help but think of the Magic Queen Camus from my previous life. She single-handedly wiped out the entire barbarian force in the Red Mountains. I wondered if, 7 years later, she had become even more beautiful and captivating. When we arrived outside the city gates, the triplet sisters arrogantly refused to let us in. These 3 were the twin magical prodigies of the Mog family, and I had vivid memories of them. In my previous life, they were infamous for their arrogance, to the point that even within their family, their reputation preceded them. Seeing their proud and disdainful expressions, I immediately revealed my identity. "I'm from the Baskerville family's envoy," I said. "I'm here today just to inspect the territory and strengthen the friendship between our families." However, they clearly intended to make things difficult for us. They insisted on reporting to their superiors first before allowing us into the city, and suggested we come back tomorrow. This really gave me a headache. It seemed they didn't know whose land they were standing on. At this point, I couldn't hold back my fury any longer. In my city, they actually dared to stop me from entering. I spoke coldly. "If you don't want to die, open the gate now. This is your last chance." As I spoke, my killing intent, backed by overwhelming spiritual power, instantly pressed down on them. At that moment, they finally understood I was the madman lord of this city. They already had a problem with me, so they immediately cast magic and arrogantly shouted, "We love teaching people like you a lesson." In the face of their threats, I casually pulled my horse to the side to avoid them. But these 3 idiots had the nerve to continue boasting, saying, "This is Mog family's private territory. No outsiders are allowed in." Stafford whispered to me from the side, It looks like if we don't take action today, we won't be getting in. I agreed with his assessment. A few moments later, 3 familiar voices rang out from behind the Hound Knights. They shouted loudly at the people from the Mog family. You really can't even tell who your master is. I could guess who they were, but I hadn't expected they'd already be hiding within the Knight Squad. Upon hearing this, the triplets immediately lost it. They were furious, thinking this was a blatant disrespect to the Mog family's authority. At that moment, 3 young figures emerged from the Knight Squad. It was none other than the infamous yellow-haired trio from my family. Seeing them awkwardly step forward, I couldn't help but regret not turning them into punching bags earlier. When faced with the triplets' provocations, the yellow-haired trio had actually stepped up for me, explaining that this was their way of repaying me for recommending them to Crossio Academy, and that now they'd clear the obstacles in front of us. Originally, I'd only planned to bring a couple of baggage carriers, but seeing potential in these 3, I figured making friends with them wasn't a bad idea after all. But once again, the triplets on the city wall began cursing at us. Without missing a beat, the yellow-haired trio shot back with an international friendly gesture, flipping them the bird. This time, the triplets were absolutely livid and prepared to attack. The Mog family triplets were top tier in water, earth, and wood magic, and when they teamed up, their power doubled, almost unbeatable. In the next instant, they all cast their magic simultaneously, and thick vines erupted, stretching out from the city gates. After casting their spell, the triplets stood on the city wall, laughing mockingly at us. The oldest of the yellow-haired trio clearly wasn't impressed by these vines. With a swift motion, he swung his sword and cut through one of the vines in a flash. Seeing this perfect sword technique, even Hound Knight instructor Stafford couldn't help but praise him. However, he underestimated the power of magic. Just as the yellow-haired brother finished his swing, a vine lashed out viciously at him. He reacted quickly and blocked the strike just in time, then retreated to his original position. Seeing the eldest of the trio take a hit, the triplets didn't miss their chance to taunt him, mocking, "Is that the famous swordsmanship of the Baskerville family?" Hearing their taunts, the 3 brothers couldn't hold back their anger anymore. They raised their swords and charged forward. In no time, both sides were locked in a fierce battle. Instructor Stafford leaned over to me and said, "This is really interesting. What's so curious about the Empire is which family is stronger, the sword-wielding Baskerville family or the magic-using Mog family at the same time." This duel was also a test of the younger generation's potential and abilities. I couldn't help but ask, "So, do I count as part of that?" Stafford answered, "You've already surpassed them by far," but to me, this was nothing more than a childish spectacle. Right now, all I wanted was to get inside and finish my inspection tour. Just then, a graceful figure appeared atop the city wall, and with a commanding voice, the temperature around us spiked. The next moment, a terrifying, world-destroying flame descended on the city gates. A thunderous explosion shook the air, and the area outside the walls was immediately engulfed by thick smoke and flames. Seeing the power of that magic, I thought for sure the 3 sisters would be obliterated in one hit. But when the smoke cleared, I was disappointed. At this point, the 3 blonde brothers should probably change their name to the Curly Hair Brothers. It turned out that the magic wasn't cast by the sisters at all. They were the ones who got blown away, their heads now covered in frizzy curls. Then, from the top of the wall, a voice rang out in confusion. I looked up and froze. Standing on the wall was none other than Mog family's greatest magical genius, Camus Mog. She coldly spoke, "No one in my jurisdiction is allowed to cause a disturbance." When Camus leapt off the wall, the once arrogant triplets quickly scrambled to explain, "We were just defending against intruders," but upon meeting her icy gaze, they immediately fell silent. Camus' eyes finally landed on me. After 7 long years, we met again. She still looked just as I remembered, but even more stunning than before. Camus gently brushed a strand of her red hair behind her ear, her voice full of anticipation as she said, "Long time no see, Vicky. It's been 7 years, hasn't it?" Looking at the beautiful woman before me, my heart lifted in joy. I smiled and replied, "It really has been a while. How have you been these past years?" But then, in an unexpected turn, I bluntly told her, "Hurry up and open the gate, because those 3 idiots just can't seem to understand what I'm saying." Camus looked at me, confused. "After 7 years apart, this is all you have to say?" I stared back, just as puzzled. Well, what should I have said? And then, to my surprise, I saw tears well up in Camus' eyes. She choked up and asked, "Why are you being so cold to your fiancé?" At that moment, both I and Stafford, the Hound Knight instructor, were stunned. As far as I remembered, Adolphe Mogg had never agreed to my engagement with Camus. But in her eyes, I had passed the test set by Adolphe, so, as far as she was concerned, we were already engaged. Seeing her bashful expression, I suddenly felt lost, unsure of how to respond to her expectations. Thankfully, Camus didn't press me further. She quickly opened the gate. After instructing someone to lead the Hound Knights, Camus began talking to me about the ongoing struggle with the barbarians over the years. She, too, understood how formidable the barbarians were. However, she found it odd that the Baskerville family only sent me and a few young hounds to handle things. I responded, "The true elites of the family are already on the other side, working with Mogg family in secret operations. As one of Mogg family's core members, you should already know this." Camus merely smiled lightly at my question. I realized she was just testing my standing within the family. She then asked me about the two major barbarian tribes, one of which is renowned for their extraordinary archery skills. In Red Mountain, the barbarians are divided into the Barlow tribe, known for their swordsmanship and archery, and the Locke tribe, which specializes in witchcraft and healing magic. After I answered, Camus seemed pleased but only gave me an 8 out of 10. I was confused. After all, her grading system is out of 100. She explained, "Your answer was too perfect. I prefer my men a little more clueless." I was left speechless by her explanation. I quickened my pace toward the main city, but Camus followed me. Her constant chatter was starting to get on my nerves, and I just wanted her to stop giving me unnecessary ratings and comments. But Camus insisted, "These are just little requirements I have for my future husband, and that future husband is you, the one who passed Adolphe's test." Even though her family had not formally approved of us, she was still willing to honor the promise Adolphe made with me years ago. That made me strangely happy. However, I still asked her to forget about everything that happened that day. At my words, Camus lightly bit her lip and fell silent. Then, out of nowhere, she threw a tattered piece of clothing at my face, shouting, "I will never forget." As I looked down at the clothes in confusion, I unfolded them to understand what she meant. It turned out that this was the same piece of clothing I had draped over her 7 years ago. But, as I noticed the unpleasant odor coming from it, I couldn't help but wonder, had Camus never washed this thing in all these years? After some time, Camus took me to the newly built fortress in the inner city. This wall was designed to defend against barbarian attacks. Seeing the solid fortifications, I couldn't help but marvel at Mogg family's magical prowess. After all, such a large-scale project, if done by human labor, would probably take a year to complete. However, the wall was filled with deep craters, and I asked in confusion, "Did the barbarians do this?" Camus nodded and explained that the deep craters were left by the Barlow clan of the barbarians, whose archery had immense destructive power. She also mentioned that during the years of conflict with the barbarians, Adolphe had been accidentally shot in the chest by an arrow from the Barlow clan. I then told Camus about Hyogo's injury during his battle with the barbarians. It seems that the Barlow clan has some very strong individuals. What shocked Camus was that it had been a female archer from the Barlow clan who had injured Adolphe. At that moment, I couldn't help but wonder if Hugo and Adolphe might be targets of the same person. However, just as we were discussing the barbarians, a mage from Mogg family hurriedly called out to Camus and informed her that they had captured a healer from the barbarian tribe, led by the female mage. Camus and I soon arrived at a camp. Inside the tent, a few barbarian healers were kneeling. Camus asked the mage if they had gathered any useful information, but the barbarians remained silent. Since the Locke clan was skilled in witchcraft, magic could not directly extract their memories. In a moment of desperation, Camus personally questioned the barbarians, wanting to know what had happened to the captives who were taken during the attack on the Mogg family fortress, especially her sister. Unfortunately, the barbarians' language was incomprehensible to them, and the translator station and there had died during the raid, leaving them with no valuable information. Seeing Camus so anxious, I quickly stepped forward and said I could understand some simple barbarian language. Camus was surprised when she heard that I knew the language. She then described her sister's appearance to me and asked me to inquire with the barbarians if they knew her whereabouts. Following Camus' description, I conveyed the message to one of the barbarian healers. However, the barbarian healer, Locke, merely gave me a cold, sinister smile. Then, he gave an answer that shocked me. I knew that this answer was likely the truth. With a heavy heart, I told Camus that her sister had been killed by the barbarians. Upon hearing this news, Camus's delicate face immediately twisted with rage. Her eyes widened, and her teeth clenched as if she couldn't believe her sister was truly gone. Then, in a cold and resolute voice, Camus declared, "As a member of the family council and the deputy consul of Mog family, I hereby sentence this one to immediate execution." In the next moment, a magic rock spike rapidly formed, and an overwhelming pressure descended on the barbarian. The spike, like a bolt of lightning, pierced through the barbarian's body. But for Camus, this was far from enough. She unleashed a blazing fire spell, and the flames erupted inside the barbarian, burning him alive. Camus vowed to eradicate every single barbarian. After the barbarian's death, Camus motioned for me to leave with her. At that moment, I understood why. In my previous life, Camus had wiped out the entire barbarian clan. Seeing her so furious, I couldn't help but worrying that she might take even more extreme actions, so I quickly followed her. As we stepped outside, Camus lost the imposing aura she had earlier. Her body started trembling uncontrollably. No matter how strong she was still just a 15-year-old girl. I gently comforted her, saying that she must have had a close bond with her sister. Camus answered through gritted teeth, her voice trembling. She was so kind, so gentle, completely different from the rest of the Mog family. Seeing her in so much pain, I softly said, "Don't be too sad, it will pass." I honestly didn't know what else to say to comfort her, and after thinking for a moment, those were the only words I could offer. However, Camus looked at me and asked, "Did you hide something from me earlier?" I realized I couldn't keep lying anymore. Even though she couldn't understand our words, she must have already guessed something. After all, the Locke tribe of the barbarians were cannibals, and eating prisoners was their custom. I nodded, confirming her suspicions. A single tear slowly slipped down her cheek. Her whole body shook as she bit her lip, trying to hold back her emotions. But soon, she couldn't control herself any longer. Tears poured from her eyes like a broken dam, and she collapsed to her knees, crying out in pain. She blamed herself for not being able to protect her sister. Seeing her in such agony, I wanted to comfort her, but I stopped myself. Maybe for Camus, the best thing right now was to cry it out, to let the pain out. As for me, I'm not great at offering comfort, so perhaps it was better to just quietly stay by her side. After a while, Camus gently wiped away the tears from her face. She looked at me and said, "If you had continued pitying me earlier, I would have killed you." Then, in an instant, she regained her composure. She knew that now wasn't the time to mourn. If she wanted revenge, she needed to stay calm first. Watching her regain her strength so quickly made me feel a little relieved. I reached out my hand, finally seeing the strong empress I admired. When Camus saw that I wasn't fazed by her words, a slight blush appeared on her face. Before I could help Camus up, a long, ominous bell tolled in the distance. Camus quickly explained that it was the signal for a barbarian invasion. Outside the city walls, I could see a group of barbarian warriors. Armed with bows and riding white wolves, they were coldly staring at the walls. Leading them was a young girl, already drawing an arrow from her quiver. In the next instant, with terrifying strength, the arrow flew from her bow, heading straight for the city wall. The mages atop the wall had no clue what was coming. By the time they noticed, the arrow had already destroyed the magical defenses. With one devastating shot, the city's walls were breached, and the barbarian girl immediately commanded the attack. Since the main forces of the Mog family were absent from the city, the sudden assault quickly resulted in many mage casualties. Some mages were even captured, becoming playthings for the barbarians. By the time I arrived at the city gates, the scene was a chaotic mess. I was late to the party. Before I could react, a rope suddenly snaked around my neck. I was puzzled. Did these barbarians intend to capture me? But to my surprise, the two barbarian girls giggled and said they were hunting for a husband. Looks like my face is in high demand, even with the barbarians. Sorry, girls, but I already have a fiancé. With that, I yanked the ropes hard, throwing them both aside. Seeing me effortlessly dispatch their companions, the surrounding barbarians immediately launched an attack. Hugo had warned me to avoid fighting with barbarians until the family elite gathered, but now it seemed like that was unavoidable. I swiftly cut through their arrows, dodging the attacks. The barbarians were stunned by my strength. Before they could react, Camus unleashed her fiery magic. In an instant, two barbarians were reduced to ashes by the raging flames. Camus arrived at the battlefield, her fury reaching its peak. Seeing the barbarians daring to attack the city, she wasted no time and unleashed a devastating spell. The area outside the city turned into a blazing inferno. As she stood beside me, Camus asked if I had used liquid magic to weaken the barbarians. She clearly didn't understand why I hadn't just killed them outright. I explained. Hugo ordered me to avoid direct confrontation before meeting with the family's elite. Camus didn't care. With a cold look, she replied, "That's Hugo's order, not mine." With a wave of her hand, she summoned a massive wall of fire, charging toward the barbarians. At that moment, she was like the Queen of Flames herself. Her overwhelming magic exploded, and flames swept across the battlefield, engulfing everything. Watching Camus in action, I couldn't help but be awestruck by her sheer power. Her strength had reached a terrifying level. Against the barbarians who had killed her sister, each strike was fiercer than the last. But in her rage, she overlooked the hidden dangers. One barbarian, lurking in the shadows, successfully launched a sneak attack. Before Camus could react, a silver needle pierced her skin. As the smoke from the explosion cleared, the attacker revealed themselves. Camus collapsed, her strength drained. Weakly, she whispered, "I've been poisoned. I can't move." Seeing her in such a vulnerable state, I sighed in frustration. "Your magic's strong, but your battle experience still needs work." Just then, the barbarian from earlier immediately threw out a rope, trying to bind Camus. How could I let that happen? I grabbed the flying rope and blocked his attack. I quickly told Camus, "The best choice now is to retreat. After all, our main forces aren't here." However, Camus rejected my suggestion. "If we retreat now, the slaves and farmers in the city will be slaughtered," she said. Her eyes filled with determination. She also mentioned that she had to avenge her sister. There was no way she could leave. I understood her determination, but avoiding battle was the right choice now. But before I could say anything else, an arrow suddenly shot toward my neck. With instinctive reflexes, I barely avoided it, but the destructive power of the arrow made me realize that the attacker was from the Barlow clan, a formidable opponent. I hadn't noticed until now, but a barbarian archer had appeared at the top of a tent. Before I could react, the barbarian who had attacked Camus earlier suddenly appeared behind me, grabbing the weak, fallen Camus. Camus, panicking, shouted my name and called for help. Watching her being taken away right in front of me, my fury exploded. But the barbarian archer didn't give me a chance to rescue Camus. She raised her bow and launched a relentless barrage of arrows at me. Although her arrows didn't harm me, I was shocked that she was using about to fight me at close range. In that moment of distraction, she kicked me hard in the abdomen, making me realize I had underestimated her. This girl's fighting style was completely different from the other barbarians I had faced. As I debated whether to go all out and kill her, she suddenly spoke. "I told you, we will meet again." What shocked me even more was that she spoke fluent Imperial language. As I looked at her more carefully, it suddenly hit me she was the barbarian slave I had unintentionally saved at the auction house. Now, this beautiful girl, standing before me as a strong adversary, had become my opponent. I was enraged by her betrayal, but she remained calm, saying she wasn't targeting me. She then mounted a white wolf and coldly said, "Want to get Camus back? Then follow me." At that moment, Adolf, having heard the bells, arrived at the battlefield. Seeing that Camus had been taken, he instantly exploded in fury, his magic charging up. With a roar, a powerful blast of magic shot toward the barbarians, but it was too late. The barbarians had already moved out of range. After a brief clash, the Barlow clan warriors quickly retreated from the city. Adolf, unable to stop the enemy, appeared deeply frustrated. As for me, I was shocked by the strength of these barbarians. They not only breached the city in such a short time, but also successfully took Camus. Soon after, the mages sent to pursue them returned with intelligence. The barbarians' escape route was headed straight for the Black Mountain Forbidden Zone I had entered when I was 8. As nightfall approached, Adolf knew that charging into the unknown Black Mountain Forbidden Zone was risky, and he couldn't guarantee he would be able to rescue Camus. While he struggled with the decision, I suddenly spoke up and said that I was very familiar with the Black Mountain Forbidden Zone and could lead them to rescue Camus. With my memories from the previous life, I had a certain level of confidence, and I had to go rescue her. Upon hearing my words, Adolf was overjoyed, as if he had forgotten how he once looked down on me. When he learned that I was familiar with the Forbidden Zone, Adolf ignored the objections of others and immediately started organizing the pursuit. Night slowly descended, and we soon entered the Black Mountain Forbidden Zone. The area was filled with powerful beasts, and a single mistake could lead to death. But to me, it felt as easy as walking on flat ground. I led the way for Adolf and the Hound warriors from the family. Seeing how effortlessly I moved through the Forbidden Zone, Adolf couldn't help but ask Stafford, "Are all of Baskerville family's hounds this strong?" Stafford replied, "He is special." Even Stafford didn't expect that I would be so familiar with the Forbidden Zone. Along the way, I didn't dare let my guard down for a second. Every beast that stood in my way was slain with a single sword strike. My violent slaughter left the Hound brothers of the family who had golden hair dumbstruck, their admiration for me overflowing. Before long, we caught up to the barbarian ahead. I immediately signaled everyone to stop, so as not to alert the enemy. The Barlow clan barbarians were known to scatter dry leaves around their camp, which would make a sound when stepped on. However, Adolf paid no heed to this. He cast a spell on me, explaining that it was a spell to silence any noise. He then stated that he would take over the operation from here. But what surprised me was that his address to me suddenly changed to son-in-law. Hearing this title, I couldn't help but be a bit surprised. By the campfire ahead, a group of barbarians had set up camp, resting for the night. Camus was tied to a large tree behind them. No matter how loudly she shouted, they ignored her completely. The two barbarians I had previously wounded were still lamenting that they hadn't been able to hunt me. Camus, who had followed them for a while, had picked up on some of their conversation. It turned out that the barbarians were here for hunting husbands and hunting wives. Just as she was processing this, a figure suddenly appeared beside her. It was the barbarian man who had attacked her earlier, and now, he was wearing a malicious grin, clearly eyeing Camus. Realizing their intentions, Camus angrily shouted, "If you want me to be a barbarian's wife, I'd rather die." Although the man couldn't understand her words, he clearly recognized her defiance. In the next moment, he grabbed her chin, a cold, sinister smile on his face. Just then, the barbarian girl I had saved earlier stepped forward, stopping the man's actions. Her name was Asian. Seeing Asian intervene, the man was visibly displeased, as he believed capturing Camus was his greatest achievement. But Asian wasn't backing down. She coldly retorted, "If I hadn't stopped him referring to me, you'd be dead by now." The man, unwilling to accept it, tried to continue his fight for Camus's ownership. At that moment, Camus, looking at Asian who was blocking the man, began to realize that Asian was a genius, just as strong as she and I were. Losing patience with the man's incessant chatter, Asian's immense power suddenly erupted. The force of her liquid mana almost materialized into killing intent. The man, feeling the overwhelming pressure, began to sweat. He quickly apologized to Asian before slinking off in defeat. With the man gone, Camus breathed a sigh of relief. But Asian remained coldly by her side, speaking to herself. Camus couldn't understand her words, and before she knew it, Asian stomped on her. Clearly, this was Asian's form of revenge for being treated as a slave. Reflecting on her encounter with me, Asian realized she was lucky, but she didn't think Camus would have the same luck. She declared that she would personally tame Camus and turn her into her slave. Seeing Asian's hostile demeanor, Camus knew her situation was dire. However, just as Asian was about to take further action, a massive burst of flame suddenly erupted behind her. Feeling the explosion and the rapidly rising temperature, Asian turned around in panic, only to see the entire barbarian camp engulfed in flames. Many barbarians were burned alive. Amid the inferno, a figure slowly appeared, and his arrival instantly caught the attention of everyone around, his authoritative voice terrifying the barbarians into a standstill. Unlike the barbarians, who were frozen in fear, Camus, upon hearing the familiar voice, immediately recognized who it was, as the flames parted to reveal the figure. The person was none other than Adolf Mach, one of the 6 great mages of the Empire. Earlier, Adolf used his powerful magic to successfully subdue the entire barbarian camp. The shockwave from that moment gave the Hound and mages from the family a perfect opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Looking down at the chaos below, I realized this was the perfect moment to rescue Camus. However, the sight of the panicking barbarians made me suspicious. During the siege earlier, these barbarians had shown incredible organization. Yet now, they appeared disoriented and terrified. It turned out that the barbarians in the camp were extremely afraid of our intrusion into the Forbidden Black Mountain area during the night. Seeing them begin to flee in panic, Adolf immediately ordered a pursuit. At this point, Camus, still tied to the tree, looked down at the barbarians being slaughtered and softly muttered, "They totally deserve this." Just as she was savoring the moment, a sound came from behind. Startling her, she turned around in fear. Trying to figure out what it was me, sneaking up from behind the tree. To avoid being detected by the barbarians, I signaled Camus to stay quiet. While the barbarians were being kept busy by Adolf and the others, I finally felt safe enough to cut the ropes binding her. Seeing me come to her rescue, Camus looked genuinely surprised and relieved. But before we could take more than a few steps, a barbarian girl suddenly appeared ahead, blocking our path. She spoke, "I knew you would come." Then she praised me for my bravery in risking my life to save Camus. It was Asian, the barbarian girl I had previously saved. But she mysteriously said, "You passed my test." I was confused by this statement and had no idea what she meant by test. Meanwhile, Camus and Asian exchanged glances, both clearly uncomfortable. And it seemed like there had been some kind of conflict between them. This only made my thoughts more jumbled. Someone as talented as Asian couldn't have been unknown in my past life. I searched through my memories, but couldn't find any figure that matched her. However, Asian's powerful archery skills, as well as her unique way of using the bow in close combat, just as I was lost in thought, I suddenly sensed the killing intent lurking in the shadows. In the blink of an eye, I swiftly extended my right hand, using the power of the demon sword of gluttony to block the strike. The barbarian man hiding in the bushes was stunned by the sight. However, considering that Camus was paralyzed by poison and unable to move freely, I immediately picked her up and prepared to leave quickly, but as I held her in my arms, I noticed her face was flushed red, making me suspect that she might have been poisoned by something else. I didn't dwell on it, though, and in a split second, I carried her away from the spot. Seeing me leave, Asian looked visibly disappointed. She had originally planned to take me back to the tribe. On the way, I noticed that the poison in Camus seemed to be getting worse. Her condition wasn't looking good. At that moment, two more barbarians appeared in front of us, but their attacks were too weak to pose any threat to me. As I prepared to bypass them, Asian suddenly caught up with us. This time, she didn't say much. Instead, she immediately nocked an arrow. Powerful spiritual energy began to gather on her arrow as she pulled the bowstring back. In the next moment, she calmly urged me to let go of Camus. But before I could react, her arrow shot forward, packed with terrifying spiritual force, hurtling toward us. Facing this deadly threat, I decided to stop hiding my strength. I quickly retreated with Camus in my arms. Just as the arrow was about to strike her, an overwhelming magical force suddenly surged toward us. Countless ice balls instantly rose in the forest, freezing Asian's arrow mid-flight. It was Adolf, who had arrived just in time, casting a 7th-tier Imperial-level spell. Seeing the arrow frozen in front of me, Camus was so scared she couldn't speak. Adolf walked up to us, his voice filled with concern as he asked about her condition. I briefly explained, and Adolf immediately began casting a healing spell. Soon, he managed to purge most of the poison from Camus' body. However, the poisoning had already spread too deeply, so she would need more intensive treatment once we returned. Once she regained the ability to move freely, Camus eagerly ran up to me, hugging me tightly and gratefully thanking me for saving her once again. Just as we were about to take a short rest, a rope trap suddenly shot down from above. Seeing she couldn't kill Camus, Asian decided to forcibly take me back to the tribe. But no matter how hard she tried, I remained completely still. She hastily told me she didn't have time to waste anymore. I broke the rope with a snap, my curiosity piqued by her words. Why did she say she was out of time? Like those warriors from the Barlow clan, she had seemed eager to leave as soon as the battle started. Was there something here that even the Barlow clan feared? At that moment, a massive oppressive force began slowly approaching from the forest nearby. Aishin's face showed an unprecedented fear, and she seemed to be muttering something under her breath. At the same time, my demon sword of gluttony began to stir. It seemed unusually hungry, yet it also gave me a warning, as though a powerful magical beast was closing in. Seeing Aishin's panic, I finally understood. What the barbarians truly fear was the approaching beast. In her terror, she uttered the beast's name. Just as Aishin cried out, a gigantic claw shot into the sky. Her words reminded me of the creature, the legendary eight-legged Spider King. The barbarians who were still fleeing were now completely panicked, and as the 8 massive claws spread open, I suddenly recalled the terror it had brought me in my past life. Adolf was also shocked, because this monster shouldn't be here. This creature, the 8-legged Spider King, was at the very top of the Forbidden Zone, a legendary world-destroying beast. Its appearance sent a cold chill through everyone's heart. The 8-legged Spider King had fully descended, its overwhelming pressure making everyone fear. Camus screamed in fright, but I quickly covered her mouth. With such a gigantic beast, it was best not to attract its attention. In my past life, I had battled in the Black Mountain for years, and had heard terrifying legends of the 8-legged Spider King from the natives. I never imagined that in this life, I would encounter it again. The 8-legged Spider King is a top-tier magical beast, capable of destroying entire nations. Its venomous spit is extremely corrosive, but even if we remained silent, it launched an indiscriminate attack. In an instant, countless venomous projectiles flew toward us, and fortunately, we weren't injured. However, the nearby barbarian wasn't so lucky. The man who had kidnapped Camus was struck by the venom. His hair corroded away. The next moment, Aishin quickly cut off his hair with a sword, warning him not to scream in front of the 8-legged Spider King. Then, she turned back to face the massive beast, clearly no longer wishing to stay. Aishin began commanding the barbarians to scatter and retreat, while I, along with Staffer and the others, followed Adolf as we quickly withdrew from the Forbidden Zone. At this point, the 8-legged Spider King had used its magical eyes to detect our position, facing two choices: either chase the Baskerville family and Mog family, or pursue the retreating barbarians. Next, it would decide which to pursue. Quickly, the 8-legged Spider King locked onto its target. Unfortunately, that target was now us. It gave up chasing the scattered barbarians and focused entirely on us. At that moment, a mage from the Mog family stepped forward, eager to show off the strength of their magic. He figured, this creepy spider monster is definitely afraid of fire magic. So, he hurled a fireball right at the 8-legged Spider King's head. Boom! They all thought they'd won. Smirking, they started chatting with Adolf about who would take the credit for the kill, but they didn't notice something. One by one, their companions were disappearing. It wasn't until blood splattered across his face that the mage finally snapped out of it. When he looked up, his heart nearly stopped. The mage who had been standing right beside him just seconds ago was now being held up by the 8-legged Spider King's claws, struggling for dear life. The sight of this enraged the 8-legged Spider King. Its fury was unstoppable. Meanwhile, Adolf, still holding Camus, was just as shaken. This was the first time he'd faced such a powerful beast. As we retreated, I couldn't stop thinking to myself, maybe this is the perfect chance to level up. Soon, everyone's gaze was on me. I suddenly stopped in my tracks. We have to stay and hold it off, I told them. If it follows us into the city, we're all done for. Stafford started to protest, but I shut him down immediately. With his strength, he wouldn't even be able to block one strike. Adolf and the others tried to talk me out of it, but I'd already made up my mind. I was going to stop this rampaging 8-legged Spider King, alone. Camus didn't want me to stay behind. She wanted to fight by my side. That the 8-legged Spider King was already closing in, under the pressure from his team. Adolf made a decision. I, too, gave the order for the 3 blonde brothers to retreat with the Mog family. Once everyone had left, I released my grip on the sword. I wasn't planning on staying in the family's territory forever, and letting the 8-legged Spider King continue his march would ruin the alliance between the 2 families. This was also my chance to pretend to be dead and distance myself from the family. It would give me the perfect opportunity to focus on mastering the 10 sword techniques in my mind. After dropping the long sword, My right hand slowly revealed the vicious blade of the demon sword of gluttony. This cursed blade hadn't been used to its full potential for years. Maybe it was starting to feel a little lonely, but this time, I was going all out. If I didn't give it my all, today could truly be my last battle. I looked ahead at the eight-legged Spider King once again. This time, I completely shifted my aura. My battle intent surged, reaching its peak. In this life, I'd received the blessings of the river of the underworld. I mastered the sword techniques I'd always dreamed of and even wielded the demon sword of gluttony. For so many years, I'd been hiding too much, almost forgetting how powerful I truly was. So today, you'll be the one to feel the full force of my fury. In the blink of an eye, I leapt onto the eight-legged Spider King's head, with it beneath me. I quickly channeled all my strength into the magic sword. It finally noticed me and let out a deafening roar, but how could that scare me? With all my power focused to the limit, I swung the demon sword of gluttony straight for its head. In an instant, the collision was violent. Under the pressure I exerted, its 8 legs began to shake uncontrollably. Finally, the eight-legged Spider King couldn't withstand my full-force strike and was slammed deep into the ground. As we collided, a massive burst of energy exploded throughout the forbidden zone. The next second, the energy radiated in every direction. The terrifying magic power swept through the entire forest. Even the people retreating in the distance could feel this overwhelming presence. Looking at the blood-red sky, Camus stopped struggling. She stared blankly at the direction I was in. But when she came to her senses, her eyes were filled with tears, and they completely welled up in her gaze. A woman from the Barlow tribe was leading a group of slaves, and to my surprise, I recognized some of their faces. They had captured members of my family and even a few mages from the Mog family, but what puzzled me was, why wasn't I in their group? At that moment, I heard a voice from behind. A Barlow man called out to me, "You can speak barbarian, right?" I had a vague memory of him. He was the one who only relied on throwing hidden weapons. He sneered and said, "You should be thankful you didn't go with them. Otherwise, your fate would have been a dead end." Then, with a cold smile, he asked, "How does it feel, watching your friends die?" He paused, then cruelly added, "If you weren't the captain's pet dog, I would have cooked you by now." The words pet dog hit me like a slap to the face. It felt just like I was still under Hyogo's control, being treated like a pawn, tossed around at his whim. In that instant, the anger I had buried deep inside exploded. "You worthless fools, do you really think you can treat me like a dog?" I glared at him, my eyes burning with bloody rage. For a moment, the Barlow man actually froze, taken aback by my fierce glare, but soon, he regained his composure and, without warning, punched me square in the face. I was knocked to the ground, and he casually tossed a final remark over his shoulder. "Follow the rope to find your master." With that, he turned and walked away. As I watched him leave, a silent vow burned in my chest. "Once I recover, I'll make you pay 10 times over." After resting for a while, I decided to see who this so-called master was, but to my shock, the rope around my neck was much longer than I'd expected. After walking for what felt like forever, I finally sensed that the owner of the rope was just ahead. Suddenly, the rope around my neck jerked. I followed the tug and looked up. In a nearby pond, a young girl was rising from the water, her eyes locked onto mine. It was Aishin, the barbarian slave I once saved. So, it was her holding the other end of the rope. Our gazes met, and for a moment, I was speechless. But then Aishin suddenly smiled and said, "Get down." I froze, not really understanding what she meant. When she saw I wasn't reacting, she quickly yanked me down with all her strength. Just then, an arrow zipped overhead, sinking deep into the tree behind us. Once the danger passed, Aishin shooed away the nearby barbarian kids who were training. But my mind was growing heavier by the second. Am I really this pathetic right now? After sending the kids away, Aishin turned to thank me for rescuing her from the slave market all those years ago. She said she was going to repay me double, which took me by surprise. It turns out, when I was trapped in that forbidden zone, she was the one who saved me. Even more shocking, she had healed my serious wounds. I couldn't help but wonder why would Aishin want to save me. It seemed like she could see right through my doubts, and answered, "You must have a pretty high status in your family, right?" She looked at me curiously. "I'm really curious. If you were sold as a slave, how much would your family pay to buy you back?" I froze. If she really negotiates with my family, does that mean all my efforts have been for nothing? While I was lost in thought, Aishin seemed absolutely thrilled. She told me she wasn't going to let me go back. She planned to keep me as her personal slave. Then, with a mischievous grin, she added, "First things first, call me master." I immediately rejected, thinking to myself, if I have to call her that, I'd rather die right here. Aishin seemed to enjoy my stubbornness. She laughed and then said, "Get ready. We're going somewhere." Confused, I asked, "Where are we going?" She smiled and replied, "Now that you're in Barlow territory, we have to go pay a visit to our leader." She then added, "The person we're about to meet is the true leader of the Barlow tribe." In my mind, I thought, the powerful woman who single-handedly managed to injure both Hugo and Adolf. Just a moment ago, Aishin was planning to take me to meet the leader of the Barlow tribe. Along the way, she explained to me the tribe's way of life and its shared food resources. From what Aishin described, the Barlow tribe still had a vague concept of private property. Not long after, Aishin stopped, signaling that we had reached our destination. Following her gaze, I saw a simple hut ahead, which must have been the Barlow tribe leader's tent. As soon as we stepped inside, Aishin's greeting stunned me. She was actually the daughter of the Barlow tribe leader. The woman standing up in the room spoke directly. "Aishin, you finally brought back the imperial man you've been dreaming about," Aishin quickly retorted. Looking somewhat uneasy, I looked at the woman in front of me, who spoke so roughly, and finally understood she was the leader of the Barlow tribe, Aquila. Not only was she the current Night Fox of the Barlow tribe, but she had also inherited the great power of the archery god, Adonai, and had successfully injured both Hugo and Adolf. Because of her, the barbarian tribe had not been overrun by my family. At that moment, I couldn't help but compare her to my peak self in my previous life. With my level back then, I would have had almost no chance against her. She was the Night Fox, with senses far beyond ordinary humans, to survive in her hands. I estimated I had about a 20% chance. This was a powerhouse on the same level as Hugo, and Aquila's presence weighed heavily on me. Aquila observed me for a while, then suddenly said, "You seem familiar." Luckily, she didn't seem to notice my connection with Hugo, but then she turned to Aishin and asked, "What's the use of bringing back such a worthless person?" Aishin quickly explained that I would be useful once I recovered, but Aquila just bluntly said, "Are you only interested in the seed inside him?" Aishin fired back fiercely, "I only see him as a slave." While they argue, I found myself distracted by the beam supporting the structure of the hut. After a while, it seemed Aquila had convinced Aishin. After all, in her view, the rights over a slave's use were entirely up to the owner. As for my ability to father children, that was only up to Aishin. I wasn't interested in their argument, but the construction of the tent struck me as extremely crude. After visiting the Barlow tribe leader, Aquila, Aishin took me back to the camp. On the way back, I couldn't help but ask her what her name was because I just couldn't bring myself to call her mistress. Aishin was a bit surprised but told me her name. Then, I introduced myself and asked her what she planned to do with me next. She thought for a moment and then solemnly announced, "First order, build me a house of your own." This request caught me off guard. Aishin clearly assumed that, as a young master from the Empire, I wouldn't want to do such hard labor. But when she mentioned building a house, I actually got interested. So, without hesitation, I got to work on making my own shelter. After some time, I successfully built a simple, temporary tent, though it was a basic structure. Such houses were quite common in barbarian life. When Aishin saw I had finished so quickly, her face was full of shock. She had planned to go back and get tools to help me, but she was surprised I had already built the shelter on my own. Standing in front of the simple tent, I felt a sense of familiarity. In my past life, with years of constant warfare and assassination, I had lived in the wild and learned many survival skills. Aishin curiously inspected the pit I had intentionally left behind. That's when I suddenly pointed out an issue I'd noticed in the camp. The pillars of Aquila's tent tended to shake when it rained, causing leaks. I suggested how to improve it to prevent similar problems in the future. After hearing my idea, Aishin pretended to understand and then asked me to help her mother improve her tent. My plan was simple: burn some bricks to stabilize the pillars and strengthen the foundation. Soon, Aishin and I, carrying bricks, returned to the clan leader's residence. She explained our purpose to Aquila, and after getting her approval, we began the renovation. Before long, Aquila was really surprised by my method. I had used the bricks to secure the bottom of the columns and fixed the roof of the tent. In the past, Aquila had always been frustrated with the leaks, but now, she clearly didn't have to worry about it anymore. Aquila gruffly praised Asian, calling her lucky to have found such a useful dog, and even told me to regularly take care of the cat chores. A few days later, I was doing what a slave should do, washing their clothes. But suddenly, Asian asked me if being a slave was tiring and teased whether I wanted to get rid of the slave title. I replied that it wasn't hard work and there was nothing to complain about, but she clearly thought that was just the typical complaint of a slave. Asian believed that washing clothes and sweeping were miserable tasks and that I should be more eager to escape my current situation. She then said, "If you follow my method, you might just be able to get rid of that rope around your neck." I immediately looked at her. The rope around my neck annoyed me to no end. Seeing my reaction, Asian was even more convinced that I didn't enjoy these menial tasks. She suggested I go hunting instead, since recently, the Barlow clan had been running low on game, and even the barbarian children hadn't had any meat to eat. She thought that if I could bring back enough game, I might be able to rid myself of my slave status. She also added, now that I could move freely, she invited me to join her on a hunt. Asian confidently told me she was the captain of the hunting party and that, as her slave, I was quite lucky. Hearing that I might finally get a chance at freedom, I immediately agreed to go with her. Asian's face, however, showed a hint of shyness. When I asked her why, she quickly changed the subject, saying, "We leave tomorrow." As we headed out, I noticed the barbarian man behind us staring with a dark, stormy expression. He was clearly getting more and more annoyed at the sight of me and Asian joking around. Before we could set off, there was a small ritual we had to go through. We had to have a charcoal mark painted on us by a nearby shaman. Apparently, this was a tradition of the Barlow clan. They felt guilty for killing too many animals, so the charcoal marks were a way of hiding their sins. While the barbarians around us didn't seem too bothered by it, I found it kind of odd. Looks like shamans, those with no real power, are a thing everywhere. A while later, the shaman finished marking Asian with the charcoal. I couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous she looked. She explained that she had a bad relationship with the shaman, and he was just messing with her. After wiping the charcoal off, Asian handed me a collar to wear. It looked more like a dog's collar to me, but she told me it was a protective piece for the neck, something the Barlow clan uses. Seeing that everyone else wore one, I figured it was better to just go along with it and blend in. So, I put the collar on, and we set off together. Asian reminded me that holding onto her waist would be safer. As White Wolf galloped forward, I quickly regretted not grabbing her. She sat calmly on top, quietly laughing, while I had just fallen off the beast's back. Now I understood why she wanted me to hold her waist. After I fell, a familiar figure approached. From what I'd learned over the past few days, his name was Axon, and it seemed the previous shaman was his grandfather. Seeing him, Asian jumped off her mount. I could tell from the way he looked at us that he was angry we were sitting together, and he stubbornly said something about wanting to steal the captain's spot. But his words only earned him a mocking laugh from Asian. What pissed me off, though, was that he vented his anger on me. Without warning, he kicked me hard in the head. I was too weak to resist and fell straight to the ground. Axon sneered and said that someone like me, a slave, didn't deserve to wear a hunter's gear. Then he asked Asian why she chose me as her assistant. At that moment, Asian reminded him to check his waist. Axon looked down, only to realize his quiver was gone. Slowly getting up from the ground, I mocked, "As a warrior of the Barlow tribe, you're not much without your arrows." Axon stared at me in disbelief, unable to figure out when I'd taken his quiver. In his rage, he lunged at me again, but this time, Asian didn't just stand by, she immediately stepped in to stop him. With a dark look on her face, she asked Axon if he was challenging her by laying a hand on her slave. Axon, furious, asked Asian if she had developed feelings for me. After a long silence, Asian sighed and replied with a hint of resignation, "A slave deserves punishment if they make mistakes, but I'm his master. Any punishment should come from me." Before I could process her words, Asian suddenly punched me square in the face. She was so fast that even Axon was stunned. Blood splattered as I crumpled to the ground. Watching me fall, Asian coldly asked, Satisfied now, Aishin knew that Axon was angry because I had rescued Camus, but she made it clear that she wanted to put an end to it. I'm his exclusive master, she emphasized. If anyone punishes him without my permission, I'll make sure they pay for it. Axon fell silent for a moment before storming off without saying another word. I silently lay on the grass, relieved that the whole drama had finally ended. The atmosphere between Aishin and me now felt strangely quiet. After a while, she couldn't hold it in anymore and asked, "Does your face still hurt?" I didn't respond, so she quickly added, "I had to do that to get rid of people like Axon." I didn't blame her. I just softly said, "Yeah, it does hurt a bit." My casual reply seemed to send Aishin into a panic. She spun around, her face full of concern. "Is it really that bad? Are you going to have scars?" Although the pain was much lighter than before, her reaction caught me off guard. Then, to my surprise, Aishin leaned in and kissed the wound on my face. For a split second, her lips were there, and when she pulled away, her face turned as red as a tomato. She immediately looked away, too embarrassed to meet my gaze. I couldn't help but wonder, do barbarians have some tradition of kissing wounds to heal them? A while later, Aishin's blush finally faded. She spoke softly, "Now, I can promise you one thing. As long as it's within my power, I'll do it." I perked up immediately. "Anything I want." She nodded, and with that, I started thinking about what to ask for. But Aishin seemed to be getting nervous, her mind already racing with possibilities. When Ashley spoke up again, she was watching me with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. To her surprise, my request wasn't what she expected. I asked her to teach me archery. Her face fell slightly, disappointment flashing across it, but she still smiled and said, "All right, I'll start teaching you tomorrow." So, Aishin started teaching me archery during the hunt. But with her constantly close by, I was getting distracted, and every arrow I shot missed a mark. When Aishin laughed at my poor aim, White Wolf suddenly spotted a target, a magical beast. But with my injury still bothering me, my strength gave out, and I collapsed to the ground. Despite that, Aishin wasn't about to let me rest. She insisted we go see the target that White Wolf had found. A few moments later, we arrived at a river. Aishin explained that, at this time of year, the river was full of migrating salmon, drawing in all kinds of predators, and ahead of us was one of them, a bull bear. This bull bear was different from the ones my family had fought before. It was a female bull bear with top-tier bloodlines. Aishin didn't want to hunt her immediately. She was after the kind of powerful bull bear that could attract male bull bears for mating. Sure enough, the female bull bear drove off all the other males in the area, leaving only the weakest one behind. Bull bear mating was simple. They just touched noses and found a secluded spot to mate. I didn't get it. Why choose a mate weaker than herself? Aishin patiently explained that bull bears in this forbidden zone had a strange habit. They preferred weaker mates because they were easier to control. Then she added that it was similar to how we of the Barlow clan chose our mates, weak on the outside, but with strong, healthy offspring. I went silent for a moment, wondering if she was hinting at me. After the bull bear wandered a bit farther, we followed its tracks. The raw, primal sounds from the cave immediately made me stop in my tracks. I had expected it to end that day. But instead, we ended up listening to 3 full days of mating noises. During those 3 days, Aishin and I made sure to keep the bull bears well fed to encourage them to continue mating. Every meal she prepared had some purple fruit mixed in, a fruit that could significantly heighten a male bull bear's desire, but it also drained their energy. It wasn't until now that I understood her plan, gradually weakening the male bull bears. Once we finished preparing the food, Aishin began preparing our own meals. As we ate, I couldn't help but remark on how long the bull bear's mating process was, but Aishin seemed unfazed, as if it was no big deal. Her words almost made me choke on my food. She laughed at me, saying, "All the men in our Barlow clan can last this long. Only the bookworms from your empire would be this useless." Then she teased me, asking, "Can you do it?" Before I could answer, the sounds from the cave caught our attention again. The mating had finally ended, but compared to the female bull bear, the male bull bear was completely drained. After receiving the seed, the female bull bear unceremoniously kicked the male out of her territory. The weaker male bull bear could only retreat in shame. In the bull bear world, once mating is over, the two become predators and competitors. So, the male must leave the female's territory. We followed the bull bear all the way until we reached a frozen valley. Bull bears usually choose these icy glaciers to rest because they are nearly devoid of dangers. The cold and lack of food here make it safer than the forest. Aishin clearly knew this, which is why she was so patient in waiting. However, since my injuries hadn't fully healed, the icy chill started to get to me. Aishin must have noticed, and she suggested I lean against her for warmth. When I refused, she pointed out that if I froze up, I'd become nothing but a liability, possibly causing the entire hunt to fail. Her words made me pause. She was right, I couldn't keep going like this. So, without thinking, I suddenly wrapped my arms tightly around Aishin. Her body warmth was a huge relief. But despite Aishin's teasing words, her body seemed a lot more sensitive than I expected. She looked a little flustered, and I could feel her stiffen slightly as if she wasn't as open as she let on. After traveling a bit further, White Wolf let out a low growl, signaling Aishin and me that something was off. The bull bear's tracks had suddenly disappeared. What was supposed to be a smooth chase now had Aishin looking totally thrown off. She hadn't expected the bull bear I'd been tracking for so long to just vanish like that. While she was trying to figure out where the bull bear had gone, a sudden, heavy breathing sound came from a crack in the ice. We both froze, realizing danger was near. Turning around, Aishin was caught off guard by what she saw. Bull bear had launched an attack. Its claws were about to land on her head. In a split second, I yanked Aishin out of the way, saving her from a lethal blow, but still, the bull bear's claws managed to slice off a bit of her hair. Thankfully, we both escaped without serious injury. White Wolf, seeing his master attacked, immediately leapt at the bull bear, buying us some time. I quickly checked on Aishin. "Are you okay?" Once I confirmed she was fine, I refocused on the bull bear. This thing wasn't just strong, it was smart. That alone made it a serious threat. Now there was no backing down from a fight. But I noticed Aishin looking a little awkward. It was me who saved her. She told me to step back and rest, insisting she'd take care of the bull bear. She seemed like she wanted to make up for the embarrassment earlier. That's when it hit me, I was just her captive, yet she always seemed to throw herself in front of me. I couldn't help but wonder what's up with the Barlow girls and their way of thinking. Before long, Aishin was back in action, and the bull bear stopped fighting White Wolf. It turned and tried to run. Aishin quickly chased it down, landing a shot to his back. Lucky for the bull bear, its thick skin saved it, or it would have been down for good. Aishin wasn't trying to kill it with these shots, just slowing it down. Just as Aishin was about to finish it off with another arrow, the bull bear ducked behind some rocks, using them for cover. To Aishin, this was almost laughable. Her skill with the bow had reached such a level that piercing steel was no problem for her. Not wanting to pierce a leaf, she could do that too. Then, in a flash, an arrow shot from her bow, perfectly aimed at the rocks. But just before it hit, the arrow was deflected like a tow. I thought she'd messed up, but then something incredible happened. The sheer force of the arrow blasted right through the rock and hit the bull bear with such power that it nearly split it in half. The bull bear let out a roar and collapsed, blood spilling from its mouth. I stood frozen, shocked by what I had just seen. The arrow didn't even damage the rock, but it hit the bull bear with pinpoint precision. The power behind that shot was beyond anything I could have imagined. Aishin's control over her bow was insane. As if she could sense my surprise, Aishin turned and gave me a proud smile. Despite the lethal arrow having already wounded the bull bear, it still didn't die. Instead, it was completely enraged and charged at Aishin like a wild beast. Facing this fearless bull bear, Aishin didn't hesitate. She shot several arrows, turning it into a porcupine. But even on the brink of death, the bull bear didn't stop. Aishin began to realize that the bull bear had severely underestimated her archery skills. Her arrows could pierce through castle walls. In the next moment, a fatal arrow was fired, but the bull bear still didn't back down. In fact, it managed to dodge the shot. The situation in front of Aishin almost made her believe she was dreaming. The bull bear was now right on top of her. Although she barely dodged its attack, she still crashed hard to the ground. That's when she remembered her mother's advice. The closer a beast gets to death, the sharper its senses become. It can even read the intent to kill in a human's eyes. Aishin realized she had been too careless, thinking victory was in the bag without leaving enough distance between them. At that moment, the bull bear fixed its hungry gaze on her, opening its enormous mouth, ready to devour Aishin whole. Just when she thought she was done for, I suddenly broke through her thoughts with a cold laugh. "I've had enough rest. Now, it's my turn." Before she could react, I charged straight at the bullbear with nothing but my bare hands. The next second, a terrifying power exploded from me. The long-dormant demon sword of gluttony reappeared, bearing its vicious fangs. In an instant, a fierce, rose-like flame engulfed the bullbear, flames roaring like a high-tier skill from the infernal Cerberus, instantly scorching it. As the fiery sparks faded into the air, Asian stared in disbelief. When the flames died down, the bullbear was left charred, nearly well done. After confirming it was dead, I slowly sheathed my sword. Asian looked at me with a mixture of awe and amazement. But just as she looked at me, I suddenly felt drained, my strength completely sapped. My body went limp, and before I could react, I blacked out and collapsed to the ground. Asian was startled by my sudden fall. Meanwhile, the barbarians of the Barlow clan were all gathered, cheering for Axon. The game he brought back was the biggest so far, enough to feed the whole tribe. Axon was loving the praise. And the other barbarians were already thinking of him as the future leader of their hunting team. But in his head, Axon was thinking, with Asian stuck with me, the dead weight, we'd be lucky to catch the rabbits. The scene shifts. After Asian and I successfully hunted the great magical beast, Bullbear, she took me back to the barbarian tribe. Thanks to her recommendation, I became the champion of this hunt. With Bullbear on the table, the Barlow tribe finally had meat to eat. Now, everyone was celebrating the victory. Meanwhile, the barbarians were gathered around, enjoying a stew made from Bullbear's meat. Asian asked me what it felt like to be the hunting champion. Before I could answer, Axon walked over, holding a bowl of stew. He was bringing me food, but I noticed my bowl had the least meat. I pointed it out, and Axon shot back angrily, "You're the champion, so you get less meat." Asian explained that it was a Barlow tradition. The champion gets all the honor, but less meat as a result. As Axon stormed off in a huff, Asian quietly laughed. After all, the wild boar Axon hunted was nowhere near as impressive as the bullbear. But the meat wasn't the real prize. After this hunt, I gained a lot. After slaying bullbear, my demon sword of gluttony unlocked a new skill, gravity. When I used this skill, my body weight increased massively, over 1,000 kilograms. Even more importantly, after absorbing the bullbear, the demon sword of gluttony gave me back some strength, and my body had recovered 50%. Just as I was sipping the stew, Asian's special meal for me was ready. She shyly handed me the bowl and told me it would greatly increase my physical strength, but when I saw what was inside, I hesitated. She insisted it was just bullbear's internal organs. Guess what they were? Although I was doubtful, the other barbarian girls nearby started teasing me, but Asian quickly stopped them, seeing how urgent she was. I reluctantly ate the food. It was hard to chew, but I finished it. Asian was so happy, saying that I'd be even stronger tomorrow. I gave her a weird look. Finally, the celebration ended, and I went back to my hut to rest. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of a huge wooden post, and I noticed deep claw marks scratched into it. Seeing this, I finally believed what Asian had told me last night. It turns out, last night she and I had placed the best meat on the post. According to Asian, it was meant as an offering. The weird part, the offering was for the 8-legged spider king I'd fought earlier. Even though the tribe was low on food, they still insisted on giving food to the Spider King as part of their survival rituals. Once I confirmed Asian hadn't been lying, I decided to head to Akila's tent to claim my reward. But when I got there, I was surprised to see a bunch of barbarians-only girls lined up outside. I had no idea why they were all waiting so early. From what I overheard, their conversation seemed to revolve around my body. Just then, Asian appeared, carrying a freshly killed deer on her back. She proudly declared that I was her man and that she wouldn't let anyone else have me. While the game belongs to the one who hunts it, the girls now believed I was strong enough to handle all of them. The classic manly pride moment. Faced with Asian's bold claim, the other girls quickly scattered. Asian looked flustered. She hadn't expected that the supplements she'd fed me last night would cause a line of Barlow girls to form, all eager to have me pick a mate. Sure, she knew they liked strong men, but she hadn't realized they'd be so desperate. It wasn't until I overheard their conversation that I figured out what Asian had actually fed me last night: the reproductive organs of a male bullbear. But honestly, none of that mattered now. I was free to remove the restraint around my neck and head to the reward ceremony. After hearing Asian, I realized that as the champion, I had the right to make a request to Aquila. but instead, Asian hoped I would choose her as my partner. Soon, we entered Aquila's tent, where many had already gathered for the reward ceremony, and there she was, the Empire's greatest enemy Aquila, sitting right in front of me. She had granted me freedom from my slave status and officially welcomed me as a member of the Barlow tribe, seeing how quickly I was recovering. She seemed surprised. I threw her a casual compliment, but inside, I was lost in memories of my past life. Today, I was destined to disappoint Asian. I desperately wanted to return to my peak state, and luckily, the Barlow tribe's sacred ground had a magical healing spring. Aquila had already removed my slave status, and she asked what I wanted. Those words were exactly what I had been waiting for. Aquila told me that if I was looking for a partner, any unmarried girl or slave from the Barlow tribe was available for me to choose from. But Asian, sitting nearby, kept hinting at me to pick her. I appreciated her care, but after thinking for a moment, I decided to try and see if I could enter the sacred ground. Seeing my determination, Aquila glanced helplessly at her daughter. Then, I spoke up. I want to enter the Barlow tribe's sacred hero spring to cleanse my body. The moment the words left my mouth, everyone in the tent froze. Aquila's expression instantly turned cold, and she asked icily, "Do you understand what the hero's spring really means?" The moment the wizard heard my request, he flew into a rage, insisting I didn't deserve to enter the sacred spring. Axon agreed with him wholeheartedly. The Barlow tribe's sacred grounds only allowed the strongest warriors to enter. However, Asian believed I had already proven my strength. At this point, the elders of the Barlow tribe were split into two groups. One supported my right to enter the hero's spring, while the other strongly opposed it. Aquila spoke up, saying that only warriors who had made great contributions could be granted access to the spring. She asked me if I was still determined to enter. Honestly, I already knew the conditions from Asian, so I confidently answered Aquila that the wizard vehemently objected again. The Barlow tribe's fountain of the hero was rumored to have the ability to revive the dead and restore their flesh. Entering the spring could rapidly heal internal injuries, but it was also the burial ground of past heroes. So, the elders believed that only true warriors could enter. Aquila had initially planned to grant me access, but seeing the discontent among many of the elders, she hesitated. Just then, a series of loud noises echoed from the Barlow territory. The sudden sound made me think we were under attack, but Asian explained that it was simply a signal indicating the arrival of guests. With the topic interrupted, Aquila told me that the matter of the hero's spring could be discussed later, and we needed to go greet the guests first. As we stepped outside, I could clearly see that the wizard was even more displeased with me. Arriving at the edge of the Barlow territory, I saw many barbarians waiting there. The scene before me was almost unbelievable. There were several Empire merchants at the Red Mountain Barbarian tribe. They brought all sorts of goods and could even speak fluent barbarian. Seeing my confusion, Asian explained that they were here to trade with the Barlow tribe. On the merchant caravan's flag was the word bourgeois, one of the 7 great merchant families of the empire. This family was incredibly wealthy, and in the current empire, aside from the Baskerville family and the Mogg family, all the other 5 great families had sworn allegiance to the empire. However, facing the empire's enemies, they were still happily conducting trade. After all, to get to Raid Mountain, they would have to pass through the territories of the Baskerville and Mogg families, unless they were taking the water route beneath Red Mountain. Not long after, a merchant started shouting to announce the trade fair. They brought common foods and everyday goods from the empire, while trading for the rare materials found only in Red Mountain. These merchants couldn't possibly be unaware of the value of these items. It was clear they knew that the Barlow tribe had no clue about market prices. Seeing through their scheme, I decided to leave, wanting to avoid being recognized. But Asian's loud voice stopped me in my tracks. She was haggling with the merchants, arguing that trading a single ear of corn for a diamond was completely unfair. I had thought that at least someone in the Barlow tribe would have some knowledge of trade, but to my surprise, Asian was just trying to get one more ear of corn. I stared at her, speechless. The surrounding barbarians quickly followed Asian's lead, demanding that the merchants give them more food. The merchants pretended to hesitate for a moment, then agreed to their demands. The Barlow tribe warriors, now with double the vegetables, thought they'd hit the jackpot. Meanwhile, behind their backs, the merchants were laughing at the barbarians' ignorance. Then, a girl came forward with a caterpillar, trying to trade it. but the merchant immediately rejected her offer. She was trying to trade a sleep-paid glass ball, but to the merchant, the caterpillar was worthless. He cruelly swatted it away, as the girl sat on the ground, crying. The merchant switched to imperial language and said that if they could capture her and sell her as a slave, it would be a nice commission. Upon hearing this, I immediately called out to the merchant, asking if he planned to sell the girl into slavery. The merchant immediately apologized, clearly surprised that someone in the Barlow tribe spoke imperial. At this point, Asian noticed the paint all over me and looked at me curiously. I told her that today's trade was completely unfair and that it should be cancelled immediately. Hearing our argument, everyone stopped what they were doing. The merchants looked at me with suspicion, defending themselves by claiming that this trade fair was approved by the forest god. I didn't hesitate to point out that the crops they brought were nothing more than cheap goods from the empire, while the rare materials they were trading could be sold for sky-high prices. This whole trade fair had become a scam, with the merchants deceiving the Barlow tribe, even openly talking about capturing Barlow children to sell them. The merchants were stunned when they realized I knew so much about the market. I then told Asian that the so-called sleep-paid glass balls were actually filled with hallucinogenic poison. Eating the powder would only damage a person's health and could leave them bedridden. Once the lie was exposed, the merchants broke out in cold sweat, whispering to each other, clearly caught off guard by my knowledge. Asian quickly asked me if the glass balls really contained poison. When I confirmed, her anger exploded. Many in the tribe had fallen ill and even bedridden from using these items. Asian's eyes burned with murderous intent. She immediately drew her bow and fired an arrow, which struck one of the merchants in the shoulder. As they watched, the surrounding barbarians realized they had been duped all along, their anger rising, though the merchants were furious. They knew they couldn't fight against the Barlow warriors and retreated in defeat. Curious, I asked Asian why she didn't just eliminate them completely. After all, they might come back to seek revenge. Asian replied casually, when dealing with pack animals, hunters often let the injured prey escape. The fleeing prey will seek refuge, and when that happens, we'll be able to deal with them once and for all. The merchants fled back to their camp, where many mercenaries were waiting to protect them. One of the mercenary leaders, seeing the merchants in such a sorry state, sneered, "We should have just conquered the barbarians by force from the start." But the merchants weren't so sure. They knew the Barlow tribe was no easy target. The mercenary leader insisted, "We've been ready for battle from the beginning. Now's the perfect time." The merchants remained uneasy, worried that the barbarians might strike again. The mercenaries, however, shrugged it off. They even lit up some cigarettes, not taking the threat seriously. Then, out of nowhere, an arrow zipped through the air and buried itself in the mercenary leader's forehead. Before he could react, blood sprayed everywhere. The merchants froze in shock, watching as the other mercenaries dropped one by one. Only then did they realize they were under attack. It was Asian and a group of Barlow warriors. Asian barked an order, "Only shoot for the forehead, no other body parts." Even in the chaos, the Barlow warriors hit their targets with deadly precision. Amid the battle, the Barlow warriors were preparing something for me. The mercenaries managed to steady their formation and were ready to fight back. But then boom, a barrage of barrels flew toward them. The mercenaries looked up, confused. Why were the barbarians throwing so many barrels? As soon as flaming arrows struck the barrels, the mercenaries realized what was happening. The barrels exploded, and fire poured through the entire forest. Many mercenaries screamed as they were engulfed by the flames, their skin burning. The merchants, hiding in the shadows, watched in horror, beginning to question their decision to trade with the Barlow tribe. By now, I had silently crept up behind one of them. The sound of my footsteps made the merchant panic. As I stepped into his view, he recognized me, the one who had disrupted the trade earlier today. Instead of begging for his life, he threatened me, "If you kill me, you'll regret it. I've made deals with the Barlow tribe shamans, and I have a protection letter from the Baskerville family's deputy city lord. If you kill me, the Baskerville family will come after you." I coldly reply, "I've never signed anything like that." The merchant's eyes widened. Now he understood why I was so familiar with the pricing of their goods earlier. Before he could even speak my name, I let loose an arrow that pierced his heart. Seeing my face, he knew it was his end. And forging a Baskerville family seal, that's a death sentence. After the first killed the merchant, Asian quickly mounted White Wolf and signaled for me to follow. we retreated with the Barlow warriors. Moving quickly, the mercenaries, realizing the barbarian attack had suddenly weakened, looked around then noticed we were escaping. They immediately began preparing to pursue us. Just as the mercenaries were about to counterattack, a massive claw shot out of nowhere. In the blink of an eye, the eight-legged Spider King appeared again, its destructive power turning the entire area to ash. Thankfully, we had already moved out of range, so we weren't caught in the blast. Aishin complimented my strategy. The fire attack not only worked but also pissed off the eight-legged Spider King, making it take care of our enemies without any casualties on our side. I silently watched the Spider King's one-sided massacre. Even though I had faced it once before, seeing it in action again made me feel the full weight of its terrifying power. A few days later, we arrived at Aquila's camp. She pushed through all objections and announced that I could enter the Fountain of the Hero. She believed I deserved it. Not only had I solved the food crisis, uncovered the root of the illness affecting the Barlow warriors, but I had also exposed and dealt with the merchants who had been deceiving the tribe for so long. I had truly earned the title of hero. Coincidentally, today was a full moon, and Aquila ordered Aishin to take me to the Fountain of the Hero. Aishin happily slung her arm around my shoulder and teasingly mentioned and the old shaman. His job was supposed to be breaking curses for sick warriors, but with me around, he'd almost become obsolete. Aishin's teasing made me realize something. Based on what the merchant said before he died, it seemed like the Barlow tribe's shamans and those merchants might be connected in some way. But right now, the most important thing was healing in the Fountain of the Hero. The spring was not far from the tribe, so it didn't take long before Aishin led me to the sacred area. After spending so many days with the Barlow tribe, I finally felt relaxed for the first time. The effects of the healing spring were exactly as Aishin had described. No sooner had I submerged myself in the water than I could feel my shattered bones slowly mending, while the effects weren't as powerful as the river of the underworld from Baskerville family. The advantage of this spring was that there was no age restriction. However, a question lingered in my mind. Aquila had only granted me permission to enter the Fountain of the Hero, but somehow Aishin had joined me in the spring. When I questioned her about it, she shrugged it off and started telling me the story behind the spring. She explained that it was discovered by Adonai, a legendary warrior of the Barlow tribe. Adonai was the only one in Barlow history who could fight alongside the eight-legged Spider King. I was skeptical of her story. Sensing my doubt, Aishin grew a little annoyed and stopped talking about Adonai. For the moment, it was just the two of us, alone together. After a while, I noticed Aishin's face turning red. She looked at my handsome face and well-built body, and memories of everything we had been through together started flooding her mind. In that moment, all she saw was me. She was thoroughly enjoying the feeling of possessing me. Even though I didn't respond, Aishin seemed perfectly fine with it. The silence stretched a little too long, so Aishin decided to bring up the trading event again. She confessed that she knew the merchants were making huge profits and that diamonds were much more valuable than corn. Curious, I asked her if she knew the real price of diamonds. Her response nearly made me burst out laughing. In her mind, 1 diamond was about the equivalent of 20 corn cobs. I couldn't help but chuckle and told her, 1 diamond could buy you a lifetime of corn. Aishin froze, shocked, and the anger she felt toward those merchants only grew stronger. She quickly covered her mouth, realizing she had just exposed how little she knew about the real value of the goods. After discussing the trade, I began to wonder how she would refer to me in the future. Would she continue calling me slave, or would she just call me by my name? I didn't like the former at all. Aishin stood up, slowly walked over to me, and then, with a dominant gesture, grabbed my chin and said, "Today, I'm going to make you clear." She no longer wanted to call me slave, nor did she want to stick with my original name, Vicky. Instead, she decided to give me a name that was hers alone. Before Aishin could finish speaking, a few Barlow tribe children suddenly jumped into the Fountain of the Hero. When they saw Aishin, they happily ran over to greet her, leaving her momentarily stunned. I couldn't help but wonder what she had been about to say. After a moment, Aishin snapped back to reality and immediately began shooing the children away. The more people in the water, the less effective its healing powers would be. Seeing her angry, the kids quickly hid behind me. I couldn't resist teasing her, reminding her of the time she had sneakily entered the water herself. At that point, Axon, who had been leading the children, explained that it was actually Aquila's decision. It turned out that many of the children had caught the virus brought by the merchants, and Aquila had sent them here to cleanse themselves in the sacred water. Hearing that it was Aquila's plan, Aishin seemed a bit suspicious. She wondered if Aquila had set this up intentionally. After she calmed the children down, Axon came over to talk to me. It turned out that one of the girls was his younger sister. He thanked me for helping her and even apologized for his previous actions. I gave a brief response, but Axon got upset, thinking I hadn't taken his apology seriously. Aishin, standing nearby, sighed in exasperation, but at least she was relieved that she hadn't said anything yet. After all, there would be plenty of time for that later. Suddenly, Aishin called out my real name, which took me by surprise. Seeing the puzzled look on my face, Aishin smiled softly and said, "Welcome to the Barlow tribe." In that moment, I realized that Aishin might be the only one who truly welcomed me here.
It's been 2 years living with the Barlow tribe, and now I'm 17. Today, I'm sparring with some of the Barlow warriors as part of our daily training. With just one punch, I easily knock my opponent to the ground. These barbarian warriors have learned firsthand just how strong I am over the past 2 years. Even though I defeat them easily every time, they still refuse to admit defeat. But today, I've got something else to do, so I don't plan to keep training them. I ignore their taunts and head straight for the forest. The warrior I knocked down doesn't say anything more. He knows there's no point in challenging me. After all, I only used the wind from my punch to send him flying. Over the past few years with the Barlow tribe, aside from practicing archery and assassination techniques with Aishin, I've spent most of my time honing my swordsmanship. Today, my 6th sword technique has finally reached perfection. I'm not at the legendary 10th sword technique level yet, but mastering the 6th at just 17 is already a historic achievement. Now that I've perfected the 6th sword technique, the 7th should be within reach. These 2 years haven't just improved my sword skills. My archery with the Barlow tribe has also become second to none. Standing at the edge of the forest, I look back at the endless sea of green. Maybe the time to leave is near. Today, Aishin and I have a real mission, tracking down traces of the monsters in the forest. After lunch, Aishin and I finally reached our destination. The tunnel ahead was left by a Mushu tiger, a massive serpent-like creature from Red Mountain. If we managed to hunt it down, the tribe would have enough meat to last for at least 3 days. But looking at Aishin, who seemed a bit preoccupied, I couldn't help but fall silent. "So," I asked bluntly, "hunting's making you daydream now?" She was caught off guard by my sudden question, her face turning bright red. To my surprise, she tried to deflect by offering a quick excuse, then quickly changed the subject. "Other hunting teams have questions for you," she said. A moment later, Aishin pulled out a dagger with a unique mark on it. "Do you know what this symbol means?" she asked. Looking at the dagger, I immediately recognized the symbol. It was the emblem of the Leviathan family, one of the 7 most powerful families in the empire, known for their brutal hunting tactics. Aishin explained that, although they hadn't fought them often, she had noticed something strange lately. These people had been pouring a red liquid into the forest and then retreating. Her hunting team had once captured one of them, but the person had deadly poison in their mouth. The dagger was the only thing they'd left behind. Aishin paused for a moment after that, almost like she was weighing something in her mind. Then, finally, she asked, "Don't you want to go back home?" Her tone carried an odd sense of hesitation that made me raise an eyebrow. Seeing my confused expression, she didn't try to hide anything. "Another group has entered the forest, and it seems like their target is you." At that, I froze. Aishin's words brought back memories I hadn't thought about in a long time. Reluctantly, she said, "The red-haired girl has also entered the forest. That was the sorceress, Empress from my past life, the one who single-handedly destroyed an entire clan. She had been searching for me in the forest for 2 whole years, convinced that I was her betrothed." I was taken aback by her words. I couldn't believe it at first. After telling me this, Aishin seemed nervous, worried that I might choose to leave with Camus. She even considered forcibly keeping me here, but soon realized that would be pointless. After a moment of silence, I gave her a direct answer. "I'm not going back." Hearing this, Aishin finally relaxed, though she still asked, "Are you really not leaving?" I reaffirmed, "I won't leave the tribe." Aishin's face finally broke into a smile, the happiness replacing the earlier tension. However, I knew in my heart that I wouldn't leave until I was stronger, until I could protect myself better. I was somewhat surprised that my family didn't know I was alive. Apparently, they knew very little about what was happening with the barbarians. As for Camus, I never imagined she'd been searching for me all this time. Using her family's influence, Camus must have been searching the Forbidden Zone. It seemed that in the years since my fake death, the relationship between the Baskerville and Moog families had grown even stronger. Just as I was thinking about how to find a way to learn more about the outside world, suddenly a massive magical creature, the flying fish, leaped out of the water. Sensing something was off, Aishin and I immediately reacted, but before we could act, the flying fish suddenly collapsed to the ground. Looking at the dead creature, I couldn't help but wonder when it had been lurking nearby. Aishin explained, "It's the rainy season, it might have just passed through here." However, I noticed something odd about the flying fish's cause of death. There was a harpoon deeply embedded in its abdomen. Aishin and I quickly sliced open the creature's belly and discovered an almost undigested body inside. By the markings on the clothes of the skeleton, Aishin quickly recognized it. It was someone from the Locke clan of the barbarians. She said, confused. "Flying fish only eats dead bodies. This person clearly struggled, why would they end up in its stomach?" I thought for a moment before replying. He might have been weak enough to be mistaken for a corpse, which is why the fish ate him. It seemed something serious had happened to the Locke clan. By evening, we finally found some clues. On the edge of the Barlow tribe's territory, we found many dead Locke clan members. They had apparently tried to flee here and stopped at a temporary campsite. What was shocking was that everyone had the same red spots on their bodies. Seeing these symptoms, I couldn't help but recall events from my past life. Just then, Aishin made a new discovery. It was supposed to be mealtime, but there wasn't a single trace of smoke rising from the Locke tribe's village in the distance. The village was in ruins, and the nearby forest was littered with skulls. We walked into the village, but the silence was deafening. Looking at the overgrown weeds on the ground, I couldn't help but wonder if the Locke tribe had already left. Aishin was also curious about where they had moved to, so she lifted the nearby tent. As soon as she did, swarms of flies flew out. Inside the tent, 3 rotting corpses emitted a foul stench. Aishin froze at the sight. But there were also many dead barbarians lying around. Looking at all this, something suddenly clicked in my mind. The plague from my previous life, Red Death. It had swept through the entire Red Mountain and the Forbidden Zone, even reaching the Empire. Its symptoms included red spots all over the body, accompanied by severe pain and diarrhea, and it eventually led to death. Aishin quickly urged me to leave. Thinking it was a curse from the gods, I reassured her that it was just a plague. Fortunately, this kind of plague didn't spread easily, but Aishin still thought I was too calm and insisted we leave quickly. I told her to calm down and started gathering some items left behind by the Locke tribe. Just as I was about to step outside, I suddenly heard a noise nearby. Aishin was so startled she turned around and screamed. I sighed, walking back to her, only to find her on the ground, muttering that it must be a curse. I followed her gaze and saw a child standing in front of us. Aishin panicked, urgently asking me to take her away, but in her hurry, she twisted her foot. I walked closer, and the child didn't seem to be from the Locke tribe. She was about 5 years old. Next to her was a pile of stones with chrysanthemums, clearly a memorial for someone. I read the markings nearby and started asking her who she was. The little girl stammered, saying she was a slave of the Locke tribe, named Polly Ann. Her name sounded like something from the Empire, so it was obvious she had been captured by the Locke tribe. But what she said next shocked me. She said her surname was Baskerville. I couldn't believe it. I quickly asked her to repeat it. The little girl nervously extended her small hand, grabbed the corner of my shirt, and looked up at me. My name was Polly Ann Baskerville. When Polly Ann mentioned her full name, I immediately realized she was from the Baskerville family. But from what I remembered, Hugo didn't have any daughters. That's when Aishin noticed the pendant around Polly Ann's neck and recognized it. It was the Baskerville family crest. I quickly stepped forward and grabbed the pendant, causing Polly Ann to freeze in surprise. When I opened it, the picture inside left me dumbfounded. It was a happy family portrait, mom, dad, and a kid. The man in the painting was clearly Hugo when he was younger, but the 2 people next to him, no idea who they were. Seeing Hugo in that pendant was honestly mind-blowing. And Polly Ann, her eyes were wide with fear, and she squeezed them shut tightly. I couldn't help but ask, "Who are the people in this painting to you?" But my expression was a little too awkward. Aishin couldn't help but roll her eyes. She probably thought I should have smiled and asked the kid in a friendlier way. Hearing her say that, I quickly adjusted. After all, Hugo had no connection to this kid. So I forced a smile, trying to make it look a bit more gentle, and asked again, "Pollyann, who are the people in the picture?" At that, Asian shot me another deadpan look. "Your smile's too stiff." Luckily, Pollyann understood I wasn't being malicious. She answered softly, "That's my mom, my grandma, and my grandpa." Hearing that, I immediately remembered what the butler had told me a few years ago. The butler had said that Hugo had once deeply cherished his family, especially his first wife, Rosanna. But what really changed Hugo wasn't Rosanna's death from illness, it was when their daughter Penelope was kidnapped by the barbarians. That drove Hugo nearly mad. He searched frantically for his daughter, even begged the emperor to let them move closer to the forbidden zone. Despite using all his hounds, Hugo still couldn't find a trace of Penelope. As time passed, he had no idea whether she was alive or dead. From then on, Hugo changed completely. He started to hate the barbarians with a passion. So, year after year, he slaughtered barbarians in Red Mountain. I never really believed it before, but now, the proof was right in front of me. Pollyann was obviously the daughter of Hugo's firstborn, Penelope, Hugo's direct granddaughter. Does that mean I'm Pollyan's uncle? If Hugo knew his granddaughter had barbarian blood, what kind of look would be on his face? After figuring it all out, I decided to take Pollyann with me. She was definitely not having a good time in the Lock tribe. Looking at me, Pollyann no longer had that fear in her eyes, probably because I'd worked hard to keep my expression under control this time. Then, Pollyann noticed something. Our eyes were the same color, they both had a red tint. So I told her, "I'm your uncle." When she heard the word uncle, Pollyann looked confused for a second. She instinctively turned to look at Penelope's grave. At that moment, she remembered something her mother had told her on her deathbed. "If you ever meet someone with red eyes, you must go with them." Pollyann finally understood. The one who was supposed to take her away had already appeared. She gathered her courage, grabbed my pant leg tightly, and finally accepted that I was her uncle. Then, shyly, she said, "I'll go with you." Maybe this was fate. After checking the village with Asian, we took Pollyann back to the tribe to rest. The next day, as I was getting ready to head out, Pollyann rushed out of the tent in a hurry. Because of the plague situation, Akila had called for a meeting. But Pollyann insisted on coming with me. She had completely become dependent on me by now. I understood, taking care of a kid is no easy task. For someone like me, who's used to being alone, suddenly having a niece was a bit of an adjustment. However, I had other plans for Pollyann. I couldn't let her stay in the Barlow tribe forever. At the very least, I needed to get her to the Empire for proper training. Next, I'd need to find a chance to send her to Gil, so he could help me take care of her. Before long, I arrived at Akila's command tent. After hearing the details, her expression grew very serious. The rainy season in Red Mountain was about to hit, and the plague would definitely spread rapidly once it did. But the shaman believed this wasn't a plague, it was a curse. He said that if they could break the curse, everything would be fine. His suggestion? A large-scale sacrificial ceremony. Aishin immediately countered, insisting that this was not a curse at all. She argued that the best option right now was to relocate, get out of here. The moment those words were said, the older generation of elders in the tent were furious. This is the place where the Barlow tribe has lived for over 100 years. Our ancestors' bones are buried here. We can't just leave. But the younger generation of Barlow tribe's people fully supported the idea of relocating. They thought the safety of the children was more important. At this point, the opinions inside the tent were divided, and the conflict between the two factions of the Barlow tribe became intense. Akila was caught in the middle. On one hand, there were the ancestors' bones, and on the other, the safety of the children. From my perspective though, the Barlow people were seriously underestimating the power of the Red Death Plague. Once it broke out, the spread would be rapid. In my past life, the Red Death swept across all of Red Mountain and the Empire's borders. The only reason the Empire wasn't affected was because Canis used world-ending flames to seal off the border. Then, the Saintess sent by the Kovalos family used holy magic to eventually quell the disaster. But the Saintess's magic could only cover the Empire, and as a result, almost half of the Red Mountain barbarians perished. With the Red Mountain and Forbidden Zone barbarians dying off in large numbers, the number of unhunted beasts only increased. Eventually, they began attacking the Empire. At that time, the Baskerville family, with support from the Empire, launched a campaign to hunt the beasts. Under Hugo's leadership, they successfully defended their territory and expanded the family's domain. After sorting through the memories from my past life, I waved at Aquila and said, "I know how to prevent the plague from spreading." To test whether my method worked, I had the barbarians capture a few goblins for testing. Over the next few days, we soaked these goblins in cold water. Sure enough, just as expected, the goblins quickly caught the Red Death after being submerged. Seeing this, Aishin understood water was the main source of infection for the plague. I then explained to her that while water was the root cause, as long as the water was boiled before drinking, it could effectively prevent infection. To convince the other barbarians, I put the remaining goblins into the water just like before, but this time it was cooled down boiled water. However, the Barlow tribe's warriors misunderstood me and threw the goblins into scalding hot water. Seeing this, Aishin was shocked and said, "Is the method to prevent the plague to throw them into boiling water?" I helplessly had them take the goblins out and wait for the water to cool before testing again. Soon enough, the plague prevention test was complete. The second batch of goblins, placed in lukewarm water, didn't catch the plague now. The barbarians in Barlow understood. It really worked. Drinking hot water could indeed prevent infection. After a few days of testing, Aquila was very happy and thanked me for solving the plague problem. However, I reminded her not to get complacent. This method could only prevent, not guarantee a 100% immunity to infection. With a solution to the plague now in hand, Aishin naturally couldn't resist mocking Axon's wizard grandfather. The wizard was furious and said, "The rainy season is coming soon. The floods will wash over the land, and it will be impossible to avoid." I knew the wizard had a point. When the rainy season arrived, the water levels would rise, the humidity would increase, and the risk of the plague spreading would also grow. So, I told all the barbarians that it was time to consider relocating a village. Hearing this, the wizard immediately opposed the idea. Unwilling to leave this place they had been protecting for centuries, I explained that what I meant was, without leaving the Barlow territory, we could still move to a different village. Half a month later, the rainy season arrived as expected, and the entire Red Mountain and Forbidden Zone were flooded by the torrential rains. This storm was unprecedented, and what had once been flat land was now a dangerous swamp. The downpour swallowed everything in its path, but Barlow's village miraculously escaped unscathed. At this moment, in the Barlow territory, many barbarians were building bridges between the trees. This was exactly what I had suggested, relocating without leaving the territory by constructing houses on the large trees surrounding the original village. Thanks to this method, the Barlow tribe successfully avoided the flood's wrath. Everyone was incredibly grateful for everything I had done for the village. I too breathed a sigh of relief, thankful that the trees in Barlow were tall enough to withstand the rainy season without issue. However, at that moment, a massive shadow suddenly appeared in the water below. Then, a giant fish monster, nearly 100 meters long, broke the surface, and the barbarians were completely unaware of the danger behind them. By the time they turned around, the monster's massive jaws were already wide open, and it looked ready to devour them. In the nick of time, someone quickly drew a bow and shot an arrow. The terrifying arrow struck the giant fish monster. Although it didn't deal a fatal blow, the sheer force still sent it staggering back. The person who shot the arrow was none other than Aishin, the head of the Barlow tribe's hunting team. Over the years, her strength had grown by leaps and bounds. From Aishin, I learned that the creature before us was the king of the fish in the nearby waters, named Kaya. Its strength was close to Srank, and it was an A-level giant fish monster. After being hit by Aishin's arrow, Kaya let out an enraged roar and in a fit of fury, began rampaging, destroying the tree houses around it. Seeing this, I immediately sprang into action and charged toward the creature in the water. The next moment, my demon sword of gluttony gleamed with a menacing light. This smelly fish was about to become the perfect test subject for my strength. In an instant, the sword's energy burst forth, and I swung my blade toward Kaya with all my might. The power of this strike was the true force of the Baskerville family's sixth sword technique. Unyielding and ferocious, cutting through everything in its path. Despite Kaya's tough skin and resilience, the sword left countless wounds and even injured its internal organs. The monster roared in pain, hastily retreating into the water, or more accurately, it was swept away by the current. I didn't pursue it after all. The water was its domain, and I couldn't guarantee that I'd be able to kill it for sure. Looking at the retreating Kaya, the surrounding barbarians erupted into cheers, shouting my name. To them, I had become a hero, having saved the Barlow tribe time and again. As my reputation grew, the wizard standing nearby clearly showed his displeasure. Axon seemed a bit distracted, but as for Aishin, she was practically drooling over my heroic presence. A few days later, life gradually returned to normal. At that moment, a pleasant aroma wafted into my treehouse. It was the fresh snails from the rainy season, a simple preparation, and they tasted amazing. Pollyann wasn't bothered by the hot shells at all. She grabbed one and eagerly popped it into her mouth. But I wasn't alone in my treehouse. As soon as Aishin caught the smell, she barged in and joined us for a meal. They both praised my cooking, but Aishin's arrival left me a bit helpless. I had only prepared enough for two, but she ended up eating my portion as well. Aishin looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, but casually said, "You're so stingy." Seeing us bicker, Pollyann, for once, fell into an unusual silence, but soon, she suddenly said, "You and Aishin are like a married couple now." At those words, Aishin's face turned bright red, but as she looked at Pollyann, her gaze softened. Then, she affectionately pulled Pollyann into her arms. I watched them, wondering when did they become so close. Just then, a gust of cold wind blew through the treehouse. It was because the small door had been opened. As I turned to see who it was, Aishin immediately asked, "What are you doing here?" It was Axun, the wizard's grandson. Axun was in tears, his voice filled with desperation as he pleaded with me to help. He told us that his sister had unfortunately been infected with a plague, the Red Death,